You said that if the Nuremberg principles were applied, every post-World War II president would be indictable.
That's probably true.
Can we run down them real fast? What did Eisenhower do that you would indict him for?
Eisenhower overthrew the conservative nationalist government of Iran with a military coup. He overthrew the first and last democratic government in Guatemala by military coup and invasion, leading to years of, in Iran, it led to 25 years of brutal dictatorship, finally overthrown in '79. In Guatemala, it led to massive atrocities, which are still continuing. That's after almost 50 years. In Indonesia, this wasn't known until recently, but he conducted the major clandestine terror operation of the post-war period up until Cuba and Nicaragua in an effort to break up Indonesia, strip off the outer islands where most of the resources are, and undermine what was then considered as a threat of Indonesian democracy. Indonesia was too free and open. It was allowing a political party of the poor to participate, and they were gaining a lot of ground, so that Eisenhower supported and helped instigate a military rebellion in the outer islands. This is just for starters. These are all indictable offenses.
What about Kennedy?
Kennedy was one of the worst.
All right, my name is Ben Burgess. This is Give Them an Argument. In just a few minutes, we are going to be talking to Shaun Richman, who's a friend of mine and the author of this indispensable book about labor strategy, Tell the Bosses That We're Coming. After that, we're going to be talking to current affairs editor Nathan J. Robinson about why he was fired from The Guardian and what the situation is there. Later on, of course, we've got David Griscom back this week. It's the last Griscom for a few weeks because he's going to be going on kind of a road trip before settling back in Texas to do Outlaws and Revolutionaries, talk a little Rusty Kershaw. But right now, I thought we should start with that. I'm joined, of course, by our producer Forrest.
How's it going?
And we wanted to start with the Chomsky Cold Open today in recognition of President's Day, as a little reminder that of course the most recent ex-president was just acquitted for the relatively minor thing that he was accused of, but I'm not, there's a kind of line that Republicans and some maybe even some contrarian, more progressive people say that's like, oh, you shouldn't do the indictment of the ex-president. You should just move on. And I have the opposite position. I think they should do a mass trial for all of the ex-presidents.
Yeah, that's my position on it too.
So
the Gulag segment where it was just everybody.
Yeah. That was the first time I was on TMBS. They're still doing the Gulag thing. We did this was while the Ilhan Omar anti-Semitism controversy was going on, which of course is very related to what we're going to be talking about with Nathan later. So we did that Gulag segment was a mass trial. We symbolically sentenced quite a few people to the Gulag for smearing Ilhan, for not defending her, for just generally being terrible and excusable assholes.
I remember not being sure how to edit that. Like, Michael was like, "Yeah, throw it up," and I'm like, how much of it? Like all of it? Like.
Fair enough. So have an okay quarantine Valentine's Day.
Yeah. I mean, at least the start of it. My girlfriend ended up in the ER. She had some she thought she might have had appendicitis, and it turns out she didn't, but Yeah, but up until that, we had our first date last Valentine's Day, so it was like yeah.
Nice. Yeah, this was my 8th Valentine's Day with my wife, but she gave me this time this T-shirt that I'm wearing. It's the picture of Karl Marx with the seizing the means of production. So
I got a Jacobin subscription for that was my Valentine's Day present.
awesome. That is the perfect Valentine's Day gift. I approve.
Yeah.
Nothing says love like Jacobin.
I never really subscribed because I was like, am I gonna get paid and then give the money right back for a subscription? And Maria was like, no, you need to have one to know what's going on. And I'm like, yeah, I do.
Fair enough. Well, moving on from Valentine's Day to President's Day. So, we talked, Chomsky was just talking there very briefly about the indictable crimes of the various ex-presidents. Obviously, he just barely got it started, before that 2-minute clip was over, and, he was just about to do Kennedy and the beginning of the Vietnam War, among other things. And then, of course, LBJ and Nixon, are the central villains behind the millions who were killed in first Vietnam, then Cambodia, other places in the region. Gerald Ford, oversaw the last part of that quasi-genocidal war in Southeast Asia, and again, among other things. Jimmy Carter is the one who's probably guilty of the least, but that's also astonishing because he had, Jimmy Carter oversaw the beginning of the arming and funding of the Mujahideen.
Yeah,
of course, became the Taliban and Al Qaeda. When his national security advisor Zeb Brzezinski, the father of Mika Brzezinski from MSNBC, said that he bragged that they'd lured the Russians into the Afghan trap. So, good job.
Jimmy Carter was the beginning of that, the humanitarian intervention streak that the Democrats have seemed to have since then with the posturing about human rights. And then, obviously it just becomes regular intervention once we're there. But it's that foundational belief that, anything we do is good as long as we can justify it via moral grounds, I guess. Instead of just being instead of on capitalistic, we need to overthrow communism grounds.
Yeah, right. Not that there wasn't still some of that, but
Reagan came right after, but
yeah. But Carter was the beginning, because he introduced that human rights language into U.S. foreign policy in a different way, even at the same time, of course, as he was doing things like propping up the Shah of Iran and funding the worst fundamentalists in the world, and in Afghanistan, while they were literally fighting a war where I think one of their slogans I remember reading once, referring to the Soviets, was "They're teaching our women how to read." So not great champions of human rights, but they certainly introduced the language of that kind of human rights interventionism. That, of course, Reagan was the one who massively oversaw the funding of the Mujahideen, famously compared them to the founding fathers, sold arms to Iran as part of the arms for hostages scandal.
Those brave freedom fighters.
yeah, exactly.
At the end of what was it, Rocky 3 or whatever?
Yeah. To dedicated to the people of Afghanistan, whatever it was. Yeah. And then, of course, diverted that money from the arms sales to the mullahs to fund absolutely depraved terrorists in Nicaragua who were engaged in a campaign to overthrow the Sandinistas, who came to power at the end of the 70s, won an internationally supervised democratic election in 1984, and the Contras, death squads being funded by Reagan. We're committing just unspeakable crimes against what were euphemistically called soft targets,
Yeah.
nuns, stuff like that.
It's interesting to go through this history. I spent the weekend, or a big chunk of the weekend, working on a documentary that we're doing for Jacobin. That I don't want to talk about it too much, but it's related to like the Jakarta method, and so kind of I spent the entire weekend. Of course, happy weekend on my end, going through a lot of
personal stuff and the Jakarta method.
Yeah. Going through a lot of path clips and like watching. I found like they had like a documentary about Arbenz getting overthrown by Eisenhower, and they have like a lot of actual footage from like the 50s that I was pretty blown away by. Like just the fact that it exists on such a casual basis, and it wasn't just like it wasn't just somebody's like home footage. You know what I mean? Like it was like government footage.
Yeah, of course that was going on through certainly by the period we're talking about. Then after Reagan, there's George H.W. Bush, former head of the CIA, and they did they've done 2 parts so far of a Chapo series about him, where some of the conspiracy stuff I'm not sure I buy, but I think they are absolutely right about how he was there everywhere when terrible things were being done, by, the so-called intelligence community, etc. That they call him the Zelig of evil. And then, and when George H.W. Bush was president, of course, that's the invasion of Panama. That's the first Gulf War, including some really spectacular war crimes, the Highway of Death, which is exactly about what it sounds like. Then there's Bill Clinton, who oversaw 8 years of sanction, of sanctions and bombings in Iraq. That famously his Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was told that it killed 500,000 Iraqi children, and she said it was worth it. That's Clinton. That's a very quick version of Clinton. There's a lot more that we can talk about there.
Before she became Anna Kasparian's best friend, and they had that great, not at all tense.
Yeah. Very friendly questions that I'm sure she was happy to be asked. Yeah. And then of course there's George W. Bush, who I hope that nobody who watched or listened to this show has a short enough memory to not know, what happened there. I mean, like in some ways is the worst of certainly the last several that we've talked about. Afghanistan, Iraq, beginning of the drone war.
He didn't send any mean tweets, though. He said,
yeah.
Be nice to your Muslim neighbors, and what a guy.
Yeah, exactly. Even at the same time as there was mass surveillance and detention of American Muslims, there was
they snatched in the city Muslims off the street in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. There's actually been quite a bit of work done. Both the FBI and NYPD was just able to kind of just snatch these Muslim immigrants off the street, walking around, and bring them in for questioning.
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course, again, the invasion of Iraq, which is like the most significant event of like the last 50 years of this history, punched a hole in the Middle East that's led to a cavalcade of bloodshed and chaos that's still going on. Overthrew the democratically elected president of Haiti, literally sent U.S. Marines to escort him out of the country, openly supported the attempted coup in Venezuela, etc. Obama, dramatic expansion of the drone war, operation in Libya that plunged that country into so much chaos that there have been reports of open air slave markets. Trump, who is oftentimes he's viewed as some sort of right wing isolationist, total bullshit, nothing of the kind. I'm actually, there's been a lot else going on. We haven't had a chance to work on it lately, but I'm doing an article with Gene Bajalan about this for Jacobin. Trump was absolutely no kind of dove, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
He doubled the rate of drone strikes in Yemen. He backed out of the Iran deal, assassinated Soleimani. He dropped a weapon called the Moab. So that's massive ordnance, air bomb, or colloquially mother of all bombs, in Afghanistan, which there are reports from an Afghan member of parliament about reports they got of civilian deaths, even if it didn't, even if you assume for the sake of argument that's false and it miraculously avoided civilian deaths. I'd argue that dropping a bomb that by its nature, like a bomb that massive that just makes a mockery of any claim to care about civilian deaths, that's a war crime by definition.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that brings us to the current guy who's only had a couple of weeks, and there have been some positive signs. I don't think we should, I don't think we need to be black and white about this. But also there's been some discouraging ambiguity about whether he's even doing the thing that he seemed to be doing that was best, which is meaningfully ending U.S. involvement in the genocidal Saudi war in Yemen.
Yeah. Hold on, I have the...
We're also stepping up our diplomacy to end the war in Yemen, a war which has created a humanitarian and strategic catastrophe. I've asked my Middle East team to ensure our support for the United Nations-led initiative to impose a ceasefire, open humanitarian challenge, and restore long dormant peace talks. This morning, Secretary Blinken appointed Tim Lenderking, a career foreign policy officer, as our special envoy to the Yemen conflict, and I appreciate him doing this. Tim has lifelong experience in the region, and he'll work with the UN envoy and all parties of the conflict to push for a diplomatic resolution. And Tim's diplomacy will be bolstered by USAID, working to ensure that humanitarian aid is reaching the Yemeni people who are suffering unendurable devastation. This war has to end. And to underscore our commitment, we're ending all American support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen.
So that's the key. That's the key word, Scott.
At the same time, Saudi Arabia.
So it's offensive operations, which again, this could be. We're very early days yet. It's there are encouraging signs, but there is some discouraging ambiguity there.
No more mean tweets, and we always use the pronouns now of the people.
But even substantively, it's a little unclear whether whether this just means that there are certain forms of U.S. assistance that are being withdrawn, or whether there's really going to be a 180 in the attitude of the United States towards this war.
Yeah, well, there's never really. Our role in this war has always been incredibly unclear because it's not one of the ones that we are known for being like an active part of. You know what I mean? Like, we've been less involved, I'd say, in Yemen than we have in Afghanistan or Iraq when we're there. Like, it's a lot of it is arms sales. A lot of it is support for the Saudis. A lot of it is
Saudi refueling, stuff like that.
Yeah. And a lot of it is, selling them arms, knowing full well what they're going to be used for. Helping them blockade the Yemeni, the Houthis in. There's so many even if you get rid of all offensive support, it's still that still leaves a wide open hole.
There's a lot of wiggle room for ambiguity there about what you could call ending offensive support. And what would count as doing that, which is I think is worth keeping an eye on because we saw certainly in the war in Iraq, we saw 20 things that were treated as big declarations of the end of U.S. presence before while there was still some level of fighting going on in Iraq. Now obviously Yemen's not Iraq in terms of the level of direct U.S. involvement. But there's still some ambiguity there. And something we were talking about a little bit before we went on the air is we should also acknowledge that I don't think that this show can be accused of being too soft on Biden, but I think that without giving Biden undue credit, we could also say that it's a little that some of what's going on here seems to be pushback from within the military bureaucracy, which is something that if Bernie Sanders had just become president, he would be facing on this issue.
Yeah, and it would be, it's pretty impossible to dismantle, at least in a short amount of time. I mean, just the holdover from, like people who are career military officers that have an active involvement in multiple, multiple administrations. Like, you can't really dismantle all of that fast. You can give directives, but like, there's wiggle room in directives, and this kind of brings up what I wanted to the quote I wanted to read, which is from the general that Biden has in charge of this, and it's from like a Middle East conference, like foreign policy conference, and she says, however, we will also continue to support the Saudis as they defend themselves. So, over the last several weeks, a number of attacks have been launched out of Yemen against Saudi Arabia. We will help the Saudis defend against those attacks by giving them intelligence when we can about those attacks. But what we will not do is help them continue to conduct defensive operations into Yemen, so that won't continue. And that leads to a long-term relationship that we want to have with the Saudis. Nothing that has been said or done means we're not going to continue to engage the Saudis and our other coalition partners.
Yeah, right. So again, that's not super encouraging in terms of a clear and unambiguous, you like end to any U.S. involvement in these ongoing crimes. And,
well, the other thing it leaves open, it leaves severely open, is what the intelligence community is best at, which is fabricating, these threats that they get from certain people. I mean, in some cases, I'm sure, they're real people, like real informants telling them this, but on a lot of occasions they end up going, well, we had evidence that there was a threat coming and we couldn't let our allies get, knocked down by it. So next thing you know, like then we're in an offensive war because of that. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not even verified information necessarily.
Yeah, right. Like the line, if you're still openly taking a side and you say, well, we'll support in these ways, we won't support in offensive ways. I think in practice, those lines are a lot blurrier than they might be if you're just kind of stating a policy in the abstract. And it's also important to recognize, I want to bring Shaun on in just a minute, but that when we're talking about, the pressures that are being faced here, which are very real pressures that, that whoever was president right now would be facing, but this is also part of why we care about who's president, because in the face of those pressures, you want somebody who you're at least confident robustly shares your goals when it comes to things like their attitude towards rolling back U.S. empire, which anybody who watched the episode we did a few weeks ago with Katie Halper and Rania Kalik and Daniel Bessner, where we did kind of a deep dive on Biden's foreign policy history, knows that, obviously you can't be confident of that in Biden's case, which is the last thing I want to do before we bring Shaun on is just play a little clip. So the Thursday episode for patrons this week is a interview with Jacobin deputy editor Micah Utrecht, who people have anybody who regularly watches this channel has seen Micah's smiling face on many occasions. But it's about an article that he wrote for The Nation about the great Mike Davis. But before we got into the Mike Davis stuff, we talked a little bit about an article that he wrote for Jacobin, and I want to play just a couple minutes of that part of the conversation. I'm joined by Jacobin deputy editor Micah Utrecht, and in just a moment we're going to be talking about an article that he wrote for The Nation about Mike Davis. But first, for just a minute, I want to talk to him about this, which is something that happened a few years ago, of course, during the 2016 election cycle, but which he just wrote about for Jacobin.
In the last debate, I believe in her book, very good book, by the way. In her book and in this last debate, she talked about getting the approval or the support or the mentoring of Henry Kissinger. Now, I find it rather amazing because I happen to believe that Henry Kissinger was one of the most destructive secretaries of state in the modern history of this country. I am proud to say that Henry Kissinger is not my friend. I will not take advice from Henry Kissinger. And in fact, Kissinger's actions in Cambodia, when the United States bombed that country, overthrew Prince Sihanouk, created the instability for Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge to come in, who then butchered some 3 million innocent people, one of the worst genocides in the history of the world. So count me in as somebody who will not be listening to Henry Kissinger.
So that came up in my Facebook memories on, I believe it was Friday. And I, of course, remember the line, Henry Kissinger is not my friend. I've quoted that many times, but I hadn't watched the full video in a while. And when I watched it, I was just like, I was in my apartment and I was here with my roommate, Shaun, and I was just like, yeah! I was just so fucking hyped watching that because I forgot how much of a smackdown it was. It was so good. And I just like, I dropped what I was doing for like 2 hours. I was like, I have to write this because this is like one of the greatest moments. As I say, you know, half jokingly, half kind of not. If this is the only thing that came out of Bernie's campaign, it's all fucking worth it because this is, and this is not like, stop me if I'm ranting too much.
No, no, please.
Anything yet? Sorry, I'm just getting hyped just watching it again. You know, it's Bernie Sanders. His agenda was mostly a domestic social democratic agenda, right? It was like Medicare for all. It was we're going to get free college for everybody. We're going to get rid of medical debt, et cetera, et cetera. And some people sometimes said, well, Bernie, yeah, that sounds good, but like, what about American imperialism? And it's true, he could have talked about American imperialism more, but it's not like he didn't talk about American imperialism ever. And it is clear to me that Bernie has a bone deep anti-imperialism that you can see from the very beginning of his political career as mayor of Burlington, whether it's like using that office for to support the movement for solidarity against U.S. intervention in Central America.
Mm-hmm.
This is who this guy is. And so, again, he could have done more. He could have talked about things a little differently, but like there were these moments of like anti-imperialist smackdown that we got from Bernie Sanders. And thank God, because who would have ever thought that we'd see this on a Democratic debate stage?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that in 2016, you know, for the most part, you know, he wasn't that eager to talk about this stuff. He'd sort of do this weird thing where he'd talk about the King of Jordan. You know, he'd pivot.
He loved talking about the King Abdullah of Jordan.
and he'd kind of pivot back to talking about the big banks. But even in 2016, much less, you know, 2020, when I think he just kind of said fuck it and embraced this stuff much more.
Yeah.
But even in 2016, there were these moments where it really came through. This being the most striking one. I think also, yeah, I think there were a few of them. Like I remember even in 2016 at a debate stage in Miami, he conspicuously refused to walk back the comments that he made about Cuba and Nicaragua, you know, in the 80s, and obviously that came back in a big way in 2020. But I mean, this was actually for somebody who didn't always seem sure of himself when he was talking about this stuff. Like this was just remarkably good. Like because it's sort of, even though you can tell that it's like something that in typical Bernie-ish fashion, he just can't not say, right. Like, you know, like this just needs to come out. It's like Henry Kissinger, you know, but it's also, I remember thinking at the time, it was very artfully done like that, because he's also talking about Henry Kissinger's war crimes, but he's doing it in a specific way that connects a pretty clear dot to what was going on then. Because in 2016 there was all this the big foreign policy discussion that was dominating everything was ISIS, the Islamic State of the Middle East, and he doesn't quite explicitly spell this out, but I mean I can't imagine anybody watching this and not kind of getting the analogy that he's drawing about, you know, Kissinger's crimes in Cambodia leading to the rise of the Khmer Rouge and the invasion that Hillary Clinton supported in Iraq, you know, leading to the rise of the Islamic State.
Yep. And also obviously this kind of rhetoric that we got from him opened the door for other things like Ilhan Omar grilling Elliot Abrams over his human rights atrocities, kind of like mini Henry Kissinger and Elliot Abrams. So, the new American left that, has been born since this first campaign, since moments like these 5 years ago, again, not perfect. Again, they could do things differently, but like anti-imperialism is on the agenda, and it apparently occasionally shows up in their public rhetoric, and thank God for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that one's called "It Was All Worth It to Hear Bernie Say 5 years ago, Henry Kissinger is not my friend," and that's in Jacobin. You were going to say?
And can I just mention that, aside from the specificity of what this clip was about, part of the reason I wrote this is because I know a lot of people, I say this in the intro of the piece, are using things like the Facebook Memories function and going back to where they were 1 year ago today or 5 years ago today. And I know a lot of my friends and comrades are, posting pictures like a year ago today, I was in Iowa knocking on doors for Bernie Sanders. A year ago today, I was doing X, Y, and Z to get, to try to get Bernie elected. And that's bringing back a real flood of emotions for people. And, we were at such, I'm sure this is true of you. I'm sure it's true of many of your listeners. We were like at the peak in our lives in terms of like thinking of what was politically possible in the United States of America 1 year ago today. We were thinking that Bernie G.D. Sanders was actually going to become president of the United States. And obviously we've fallen very far from there and everything that has happened since that year. But so in writing this stuff out, I just wanted to kind of affirm that feeling that a lot of people are going through. Because I watched this video and I was reminded, oh yeah, like everything that we did is worth it. And this video was coming up at in my memories, the same time as when I was in Iowa and when I was doing all these things for Bernie. So people should, acknowledge that emotion and sort of, they should affirm it. They should be like, yes, it was the correct thing to do, to throw everything that I had into the Bernie Sanders campaign. To try to get this guy elected. Because why? Well, for one thing, he did shit like this. He said, Henry Kissinger is not my friend.
Yeah, no question. And I mean, I guess I remember 2012 when it was things were dismal enough that the closest you got to to get anything like this, you actually had to watch the Republican debates, because crazy old semi-libertarian reactionary Ron Paul would at least have moments when he said very honest and things about U.S. imperialism, but actually getting to hear it from the left. I mean, that's definitely an underrated virtue of the Bernie campaigns. So thinking about that, where things were, a year ago, which, I mean, obviously it's pretty brutal in many ways to think back to that. I mean, I know certainly in my case, although I don't think actually any element to this is unique, but certainly in my case, I think that, a lot of stuff that's somewhat related, but not completely related is very mixed up in that, when I think about, what things were like this time a year ago, because a lot of things were better, right? Bernie Sanders winning the presidential, contest. We could go outside. Those are definitely two of the big ones.
Go outside, could go inside.
Yeah.
Go in a lot of places.
You could just do all kinds of things. You could go to bars, you could go to restaurants.
Dude, you don't even know what life was like back then, okay? It was crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
We went inside, we went outside, we went many places, wherever we wanted. It was nuts.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I mean, and of course also, I mean, it's definitely mixed up in my head with Michael Brooks still being alive, because that was, I remember a year and a little bit less than a week ago, was at the end of the weekend that I was in Brooklyn for the last TMBS live show, and I mean, the last time I saw him in person, it was at the end of that weekend, and I remember, we kind of had lunch, at the end of the weekend. I've been crashing with him and his girlfriend in Brooklyn, and my wife had been staying with a friend in New Jersey, but we all got together for lunch on the last day, and that conversation, which was a very happy time, was all very much bound up in the fact that Bernie, Bernie was winning. That like I remember, Jennifer telling Michael, it's the first time they'd met, that every time Dennis watching YouTube, he's either watching you or Bernie, and in typical Michaelish fashion, the response was, "Yeah, that's correct. That's what you should watch."
That's a well-balanced diet right there.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. But this whole business of thinking about past defeats and how we relate to them is all over the place in this long piece that you wrote for the Nation, which I believe is actually, as of this morning when I was looking at the website, is in the list of the most popular articles that they've published in like the last couple of weeks.
It's very bizarre to me. I mean, it's like, who would have guessed that so many people want to read like 6,000 words about this old socialist writer? Just not what I would have expected. But I'm very grateful that people are reading.
All right, so you can watch the rest of that episode, every other Thursday live episode. Go to patreon.com/Ben Burgess, and we'll talk more about that later on. But right now, on that very encouraging note of thinking about grappling with the effects of past defeats, we have GTAA senior class war correspondent Shaun Richman, and he is the author of this book, "Tell the Bosses That We're Coming," and he is also muted. Unmute yourself, Shaun.
I will unmute myself. And why am I the expert on past defeats? Is that just like I'm just history's loser here?
Well, I mean, it's certainly what a lot of the book, I think, is grappling with, that the labor movement. I'm going to blow a lot of people's minds here. Not everything has been awesome.
Yeah, definitely true. And we're at a weird moment where, for the first time in almost a century, I think we have a Democratic presidential administration that recognizes that the Democratic Party faces an existential threat if there is not a strong labor movement that can do what a labor movement does, which is a lot of political education, a lot of organizing, a lot of get out the vote. And we might get the PRO Act, which is not nearly good enough, but we might get it. And I'm terrified that we might get it and that we're not ready for what we do in the moment that we get it. When we got the National Labor Relations Act, we basically had 11 years to get whatever we could before they started tamping down on our wins. And we're just not nearly as prepared there, which is one of the reasons that I wrote the book.
Yeah, so I want to talk about this. I should say, by the way, that this could be a deep cut, but this is not the first conversation I've had with Shaun about this. When I was co-hosting the Dead Pundits Society, we recorded like a 2-hour interview about this that, for various reasons, never ended up making it out into the world. Might dig it up now and share it at least with patrons. But in that, we spent probably more time than we're going to be able to spend tonight talking about the history that set up the moment that we're in with this right now. But I do want to talk about that a little bit. Forrest, do you have the Reagan sound?
Yeah. Hold on 1 second.
So one thing that you talk about in your book, and I think it's a really interesting like one of the reasons I was so interested to read the book in the first place is that I think that it's a third way, but in a good way, between a couple of ways that I think that often that radicals talk about and think about, the situation that the labor movement is in right now, which, there's one way that is sort of what I was weaned on as like a baby radical, Trotskyist, which is where you say, okay, there's the big problem with everything is the bureaucracy, basically, like union bureaucracy, basically being, too soft and not militant enough. And that if you kind of deal with that, you sort of solve the problem. And then another way is kind of uncritically cheerleading for, what the union movement is doing right now, and saying if only we, like basically we just need to keep doing more of the same, and we'll be okay.
But harder and faster.
Yeah, exactly.
More.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I want to bring you on, because I think anybody who's seen the show has seen has heard me say many times, and that any path forward for the serious left has to go through rebuilding the labor movement. Without that, without a sort of organized working class at the base, nothing else really gets done, which I think has the virtue of being true. But after you said it enough times, it sort of starts to feel a little cheap.
Complicated. Yeah, it's not easy. It's
right, because it's
not making Jello here.
Because at a certain point, like I think there's a reasonable response, which is okay, but are you eventually going to get around to telling us some stuff about how to do that? And I think this gets into the critique that you have in the book, even though it's not really framed primarily in terms of like the bad leadership analysis, that if only you had different, leadership, everything would be better. Like, mentioned Trotskyism before. There's, Leon Trotsky wrote something in the 1930s where he said the crisis of the international working class is ultimately a crisis of leadership. And whereas in this book you have showing, I think that you're about my age. I don't know if everybody gets this reference now. You talk about the Battlestar Galactica TV show in the late 2000s. Talk about like President Roslin being reluctant to put anyone out the airlock. Because you have so few people left, as a kind of analogy for how to think about certain factional fights in the labor movement. But you do make this critique of the way that we think about how union organizing works, what a unionized workplace even is, how the process works. And I want to set that up. So let's just watch. This is our this is Ronald Reagan eulogizing Walter Reuther.
Walter Reuther was one of the first major labor leaders to advocate that management and labor
Can you guys hear the audio
shift
from
away
it?
from battling over wage and benefit levels to a cooperative effort aimed at sharing in the ownership of the new wealth being produced. He was looking far beyond the next contract. There's a story that Reuther was touring a highly automated Ford assembly plant when someone said, "Walter, you're going to have a hard time collecting dues, union dues, from all these machines." And Reuther simply shot back, "Not as hard a time as you're going to have selling them cars." Reuther was killed in a tragic plane accident in 1970, so he didn't live to see the passage of legislation sponsored by Senator Russell Long of Louisiana that provides incentives for employee stock ownership plans, or as we call them, ESOPs.
Yeah. So that's Reagan talking about Walter Reuther, who of course oversaw all kinds of wonderful militant things to dramatically grow the labor movement, and sit down strikes in the 30s and all that, but praising him for ultimately helping to create a system of labor peace.
Same as it ever was, right? Like, I mean, Karen Lewis died last week, and people are already like trying to turn her into an MLK whitewashed version of like, no, she was really about this. It's like, no, she was about fighting the bosses. Like, don't try to whitewash this. Like Walter Reuther, Mitt Romney's dad, who was the governor of Michigan, referred to Mitt Romney and referred to Reuther as the most dangerous man in Detroit. He was dead for more than a decade by the time that Reagan was saying that stuff about him. So that tells you a lot there. I would say that Reuther plays an interesting role in labor. Like I have never met an auto workers activist who did not talk about Reuther and have a possibly apocryphal story about how Reuther told us what to do and we got it wrong. Reuther told us like the auto factories, like the big three, got to build smaller cars, more fuel efficient cars, all this other stuff. I mean, that's what happens when you die. And when you were a big threat when you were alive, people like start to create these legends about you. I think Walter Reuther was a great union leader.
Sure, yeah.
I would also say that, like, I mean, you're right in my book. Like, I have no truck for like the union leaders are our problem critique of the labor movement. I actually think that in many ways, John Sweeney, who also died recently, Bruce Rayner, who was kind of a shit to a lot of people, but a lot of these union leaders of the sort of the mid 90s through era were in a lot of respects a lot smarter and a lot more thoughtful about how to proceed than like the heroes of the labor movement, like John L. Lewis, etc. Because good leadership is not really like, it's not that we lack for good leadership. It's that the full weight of the law has crushed down on us and has been down on us for half a century. And we had 11 good years from the passage of, a little bit before the passage, I would say the passage of the NRA, the Blue Eagle, until Taft-Hartley. We're like, we had the full weight of the federal government saying, if the workers want to have a union, you got to respect that. And we had leaders who took as much advantage of it as they could. And then it came to a crashing stop. And because it wasn't, the end of that wasn't a tragedy or a crisis. It wasn't like an immediate thing. It was more this sort of slow decline, that it took us so long to recognize it that I think a lot of the left has an interpretation of how to fix labor that is built upon this sort of 1970s Trotskyite interpretation of, we need a more militant rank and file, we need better leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And like, they couldn't recognize at the time that like, no, like we're in the middle, we're in like the first act of a 4-act open shop drive that is gonna, there's not gonna be as much murder as there was in the previous ones, but like it's gonna be pretty vicious.
Yeah.
And one of my frustrations, and my book is frankly, it's a Frankenstein's monster of a book. Like I'm trying to speak to several audiences at once. I'm a little bit all over the place with it because when you're writing a book, you're like, maybe this is my only book. I'm gonna throw everything at it. But a lot of the sort of
not going to be your only book, by the way. I think that's already.
I think. Well, no man has promised tomorrow, so who knows?
Okay. All right.
Yeah, but a lot of the sort of the left wing labor strategy, particularly, I think what is called the rank and file strategy, based out of the DSA, and I think that it's actually way more nuanced and there's way more facets to it. But I think that it tends to get boiled down to, by far too many people, as sort of a replay of the 1970s sort of rank and file, like get a job at a factory and form an opposition caucus and take over the union. And I don't see it. I mean, like, we all saw how the 1970s ended. It ended with, Ronald Reagan. And a lot of my inspiration when I started writing was Stanley Aronowitz, who wrote a lot of amazing things during that 1970s period, a lot of amazing books. Everybody should read at least one book by Stanley Aronowitz. But, when he actually formed an opposition caucus and took over his union leadership and became, I don't know if he's like financial secretary or treasurer or whatever of the Professional Staff Congress, Local 2337 of the AFT, he just felt himself bogged down in the full weight of this legal system that is crushing unions. The duty of fair representation, grievances, arbitration, etc. And his last book, which is amazing. This is the book you actually should read. It's The Death and Life of Great American Unions, or Labor. I might have gotten the name wrong, but just Stanley Aronowitz's book from 2017 or whatever. Read it. He just, I read it. I was still on staff in a well-paid job at the AFT, and it was a totally disturbing book to read because he was putting names to feelings that I had, just like things that just weren't working, and I couldn't unread it.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. And, Frankenstein, though it may be, I've got some, it's a great book, and it's in many ways, one of which is that it's also doubles as a reading list for other things, that people can get into, to do a deep dive about this.
Yeah.
But even if you think, okay, so this idea that like the main thing that you need to do to turn things around in the labor movement is to have rank file caucuses, have these opposition caucuses, have more militant leadership, that's going to run up against some of the same structural obstacles that have been defeating the mainstream of labor. So it's not a question, and for that matter, this also goes to the other one of those forks that we talked about at the beginning, which was the idea that everything that we're doing is great. We just need to do more of it. And in both cases,
harder.
Yeah. Both cases, 10% more organizing budget, that should do it. And
20% was
okay.
Cool. Yeah.
But in both cases, this sort of the idea is that it's kind of insufficient will, and you reject that, but that doesn't mean that that nothing like so. Instead, I think what you kind of suggest in parts of the book is that it's not so much like insufficient will or insufficient guts or insufficient militancy or insufficient attention to organizing even, it's there's a more basic need to rethink things. And you've got a great line observation where you talk about the beginnings of the Cold War and the communists being purged from the AFL-CIO, and you say that, okay, there's some left-wing mythology that you sometimes get here that like, oh, this is where everything went wrong because the communists had like the right answers. And you think, well, that's not necessarily it, right? It's not necessarily that they had all the answers either. So it's that they had all the right opinions. It's that, but the germ of truth in that left-wing narrative is that this is a tragedy because it's kind of the end of just different opinions, period.
Just pure disagreement. Yes. And this is one of my terrifying fears about the PRO Act, that the PRO Act was born out of a process of, look, it's a natural tendency within the labor movement to be like, we need unity. We need let's get in a room, let's come up with what's the consensus, and then like that's our plan and we move forward. And like that's great when like the plan is good, but when like you genuinely don't know how to move forward. And I say this to somebody that I genuinely don't know how to move forward. I'm putting some ideas out there, but I could be totally wrong. I have total humility in that. Nobody knows the pathway forward for labor. It really is a very complex problem. And so disagreement is probably the best thing. Like, you know, I've been out of those rooms. I call it like the dark, airless rooms, like these, you know, like you'd have these meetings in like the O'Hare Hilton where like it's in the basement. There's not even any windows. And you're like, come on, we can figure this out. How do we, Janus is coming down. We're going to lose agency fee. How do we get the best signups? And like your whole goal is to come out of the room with the best idea. And it's like, you're just not gonna, because you're talking to yourselves and you're, you know, and like you're all DC based, or like you're DC plus Chicago plus LA and New York. And it's just, it's not enough.
Yeah.
And like there's things about that sort of like post Janus strategy where like even at that level, I've got like real criticisms of like, this maybe is not the best idea here. Like maybe there's a time to radically rethink exclusive representation. Who do we even ask to join? Do we want everybody to join? Because when you're in a right to work situation where not everybody has to join, but everybody is covered by the contract, anybody who is a union member and more so a shop steward is de facto a union leader. And so if the guy who joined right away is a racist, if he's a sexist, and he becomes the de facto union leader just because he was the first one to join, and you needed to get that card and you needed to get that $15 a month or $30 a month, did you just cost yourself 45 other workers in the unit because nobody wants anything to do with this guy who's the first to join because he's a shitbag?
Yeah, so let's there's a lot there that I want to get into, but let's back up a little bit because I think some people watching this or listening to it later might not know what some of the terms that you just used mean. So let's start. Let's start with Janus. So this is a big thing. A couple of years ago. I was actually in my one little stint as a extremely low level sellout union leadership person. I was on like the board of the adjuncts union at Rutgers for a couple of years, and that was certainly the internal discussion there was just thoroughly dominated by this and people being afraid of what this Supreme Court decision was going to do to us. So you want to start by filling in people about what that is?
So right to work is a thing that is passed in the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. It's the first major amendment to our main labor law in this country. And it basically allows states to pass laws that say, even if you're represented by a union, you don't got to pay dues. You have a right to work without having to belong to the union. And I actually think there's a lot that could be litigated there in terms of what the 1947 legislators thought. But basically, it's I get the benefits of the contract, I get to shit on the contract, I get to complain about it, and I'm going to pay anything in dues. And it has been a real resource suck among unions. And
it's basically it allows people to be free riders. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not crazy about the free rider frame because I think it sends unions off in the wrong direction. But it does. It's a resource suck, and most of the states that passed these right to work laws that said like you get the full benefits of the union contract but you don't have to pay anything were mostly the old Confederacy and eventually the Sun Belt. And what it caused unions to do is to not organize in the South and in the Sun Belt. And that just caused employers in the North and the Midwest to relocate their factories and their warehouses to the South and to the Sun Belt. That's bad. And then particularly like after the Tea Party midterms, and the Koch brothers get all of these Midwest state legislatures, Wisconsin, Michigan, all of these states start passing these right to work laws that used to be like, okay, that's the Confederacy, and the union movement could write them off. Now they're going to like what used to be the heart of the labor movement. And it caused real declines in union power and resources. I think one of the most fascinating numbers, or some of the most fascinating numbers you could look at in terms of why Donald Trump won, I don't have them exactly, but Donald Trump had fewer votes than Mitt Romney in the state of Michigan.
Right.
Fewer votes, still won the state of Michigan. And remember, he lost the popular vote across the country, but he won these 3 states by these narrow electoral college votes. Michigan in 2012 was a state where everybody who's represented by a union was in the union. The unions could campaign to them. They could do political electoral work. By 2016, it was right to work. And did just enough people drop their union that their union couldn't communicate to them why this candidate is going to like not send you to a concentration camp and this guy is like garbage on a stick? Yeah, it was like 10,000 votes. Probably right to work alone explained why Donald Trump won Michigan in 2016. So the Republicans know that that's the plan. And then they're moving this plan to be in the public sector. You're stuck with judge-made law. The conservatives have been moving a plan for a long time to outlaw what's called agency fee, which is the basic principle of if you get the benefits of a union contract, if you can file a grievance and the union has to spend money on your behalf to prosecute that grievance, you should have to pay a fee. First, it was called Friedrichs versus CTA. It was gonna get a 5-4 ruling before Judge Scalia died, that was a lovely day. It was, we all did a little jig on that day. And then when Trump won and, they rushed through whoever, which one was it? Who cares? Doesn't matter. They're all the same. Some white guy or some white lady. They pressed through the same damn case from a different state. This time it was Janus versus AFSCME, whatever.
I think that's right.
And it passed. And so now the entire public sector is right to work. And the public sector, this is not great for labor. It's not great for labor for the public sector to be the backbone of the labor movement. But the entire public sector, all the teachers unions, all the municipal workers unions, all your garbage men are in a right to work situation. It wouldn't matter that much if all of Amazon was union, but all of Amazon is not union, so it was incredibly damaging. And I don't know how do we get to this part of this?
Yeah, so we just you were talking about Janus, and what this is, right? So it's basically making all public sector workers, the entire public sector right to work. So you have a union that's the union that represents that workplace. They have a legal obligation to represent every worker there. But file like have the grievance procedure, etc. Right? But not every worker there has an obligation to even pay an agency fee to support what the union's doing on their behalf, which is an obvious among everything else that you're raising, like the electoral consequences, is just an obvious huge problem just for the finances of these unions. And so you're talking about rooms where people in union leadership are in kind of a panic about how to respond to this, and you feel like they don't have sufficient disagreement about basics for anything good to come out of that room. Before we go on to your point about that, I do want to just briefly address. So we had a super chat question about the PRO Act, which you mentioned before. So again, people I think have different levels of understanding. Maybe who are anybody who's watching this or listening to it is extremely sympathetic, but not necessarily versed in the details of a lot of this stuff. So let's start with the basics. The PRO Act that you've referred to a few times. What is that exactly?
It is the Democrats' sort of standard let's reform our main labor law The drafting process, my frustration with it is that it was very much an insider thing. It's very much like not enough people were reading not enough papers. And partly this is just like there's not enough congressional staff to deal with it. And I think there's a problem with the AFL-CIO and its affiliates not raising their ambitions to the moment and just feeling like, we're in trouble and the Democrats are never, the Democrats don't love us like the Republicans hate us. That's like a,
Right.
it's a thing that is said all around. But what it does is it essentially repeals the Taft-Hartley Act. So it re-legalizes solidarity activism. The idea that, like, if you were working at the Oreo cookie factory in Chicago, where they closed your factory down and moved the jobs to Mexico, if supermarket workers all over the country want to say, I'm not going to put Oreo cookies on the shelves, we're going to throw them in the garbage dumpster behind the store. That's not illegal anymore. Well, it's not illegal anymore.
Yeah.
It restores the right to strike, which we don't actually have a right to strike right now. A real right to strike would entail you have a right to return to the job after the strike is over, win, lose, or draw. We lost that in a Supreme Court decision in 1938.
Yeah, and those two things that you just mentioned are huge. I think not everybody
huge. Yeah,
has a sense of just how uniquely
backwards we are. Like I think labor than we do.
It's illegal to go on a strike in sympathy with somebody else's strike and solidarity with it, just not out of the issues that you're bargaining over, but just to help out, your fellow workers somewhere else who are on strike. It is legal to essentially, you can't call it firing them, but to hire permanent replacements for
I think we could go down
which is a distinction without a difference. But the point is just that, like, this is just by global standards, these are just astonishingly terrible.
If you look at the strike statistics over the last 50 years, you see this tremendous, like, historical down wave, and then like this slight uptick in the last couple of years. The down wave is, people like to think of Reagan firing the air traffic controllers, and that's what they did. Nah, that was symbolic. That was just the president saying, like, go ahead. The real issue is that this company, this copper mining company in Arizona called Phelps Dodge, bargained their workers to impasse over draconian cuts in pension and healthcare and wages, and then they bust in thousands of scabs. And they dared their workers out on strike, and the workers went out on strike. And then the local cops were totally in the boss's pocket. And after 12 months, the scabs could conduct a what's called a union decertification election under the NLRB and voted the union out. 1982, 1983. That's the roadmap. Once Phelps Dodge did that, every other boss that wanted their union out did that. And that's where you saw the massive deunionization over the course of the Reagan-Bush era. And that's where you got to the point where for many workers, the idea of going on strike became terrifying. It became terrifying for workers who had a union. It became this point in union organizing campaigns. In a union organizing campaign, the bosses will do captive audience meetings. You have to attend or you're fired. And within that meeting, they would say, the union's going to make you go on strike. We're not going to give you anything, by the way. You're getting nothing from us. But if you go on strike, the union might make you go on strike, and then you could lose your job, which is just an amazing sort of, I love what you do in terms of like talking points and philosophy. Like you could have a field day with that. But at the end of the day, all it is just like the boss saying like, fuck you. You're here forever until we say you're not. And it just devastated the right to strike. And it's only after the Chicago teachers went on strike in 2012 and then the Red for Ed strikes and the Fight for 15 strikes that we're getting back to, and we're not in a strike wave. We have come back to like mid 1980s levels of strikes. The mid 1980s were a shit period for going on strike. It was terrible. Devastating. The PRO Act would end that. It would restore the right to strike in a very meaningful way, because if you knew you could return to the job, win, lose, or draw, you go out on strike, you don't get a raise, the boss wins everything, but you still have a right to go back to the job, which was the intention of the National Labor Relations Act, you would go on strike. You would do it. You'd roll the dice. You'd do it for a couple of days at least. You'd go on strike. So those are huge. My biggest concern with the PRO Act, I mean, first of all, how do you get it passed? I'm sure I can see a lot of comments in the feed here. How do you get it passed? Which
that's not something you could pass by reconciliation, right?
I think there are arguments that you could. The Congressional Budget Office is going to be a problem here, but also includes with it financial penalties for committing unfair labor practices. Bosses violate the law all the time, and all they get is you have to put a posting up. The PRO Act is going to involve financial penalties, which would go to the federal government to continue to enforce the act. That alone.
So that might be significant. So for people who don't, that would be the significant budgetary impact you need to be able to get around the filibuster by passing it through reconciliation. So that could theoretically happen. Although,
yes, I think so. But here's another problem with that. And this comes back to the airless rooms in the basement of the O'Hare Hilton unions stopped filing ULPs a long time ago. Unions have been suffering in silence about how bad the law is for such a long time. So nobody cares. The press doesn't care. The politicians don't care. We don't have the money to prosecute all these ULPs. And so the Congressional Budget Office put out a report about well, how much money is this going to make us if we have financial penalties? And they could really lowball the figure, because they could base it on how many ULPs unions actually file. We need a campaign of unions filing all the ULPs. Because if unions filed every ULP that happened, it would create tens of millions, possibly hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue for the federal government to fund the NLRB. So it could get passed through reconciliation. And also, the whole debate about the filibuster seems like a fairly fast-moving situation. That aside, my biggest complaint about the PRO Act is that there's not enough attention in it by the framers of it to how much damage the courts have done to the NLRB. We can talk about the Taft-Hartley Act, which was bad, but most of the damage is actually judge-made. We lost the right to strike not from the Taft-Hartley Act, but from this crappy Supreme Court decision from 1938 called McKay versus the NLRB, where some Supreme Court justice just was it was some company fired about 5 ringleaders of a strike that lasted through a weekend, and they were well, you can't discriminate against them, so they need to get rehired. But of course, if it was necessary to protect and continue your business, then you should be allowed to find some non-discriminatory way to hire new employees to replace your strikers. Had nothing to do with the facts. The strike took place over a weekend. That's it. That's what Phelps Dodge based their strike busting strategy on, decades later. The Supreme Court decided that employees have don't have a First Amendment right to criticize their employer because they need to be loyal, that there's a disloyalty penalty for criticizing your employer, right? The Supreme Court decided that college professors are inherently managerial because we got to go to too many goddamn meetings where the administration is going to overrule us anyway. There's so many judge-made rules that are garbage, and the PRO Act basically doesn't deal with them. And one of the things that and this is even my idea, I found this thing from some book from 1994.
So you think the PRO Act is great, but
you need to tell the bosses to the judges to fuck off, and the bosses. You got to tell everybody to fuck off. Everybody should fuck off. Who's not a word? Fuck off. But no, I mean the judges.
Title for the episode. Keep going.
You need some language that says. And so this guy Richard Block wrote this thing in 1994 when we thought that Bill Clinton might fix the labor law, And he was like, hey, here's the thing you got to do. You need to put some simple language in the labor law that instructs the National Labor Relations Board to ignore judicial precedent. Take every decision on its own merits. Forget what some judge who was dealing with factory logic from 1938 has to say about like Amazon in 2020 or Google, in 2021. Like, just dismiss it all. Make new laws. It's huge because I've experienced this personally as a union organizing director. The NLRB is so hamstrung by Supreme Court decision, that if you get a case that just rubs up gently against like the Yeshiva Act or anything else, Jefferson Standard, they freeze, they get paralyzed, they don't deal with it, and it kills an organizing campaign. And that is one of the biggest things that's missing from the PRO Act. And that's one of the, that's again, not disagreement in the room. I wasn't in the room. I wrote the book so I could virtually be in the room. It's a huge missing component.
Yeah. So one discussion is about, what kind of legal reform we need. And there might be possibilities now from this dilemma that that you're talking about, that obviously centrist Democrats have done tons of stuff in the last few decades to undermine the bargaining power of major unions, etc. All of that's true. They're obviously beholden to the owning class. But they do have this contrary incentive because electorally they are really screwed if unions go away completely. So that the tension between those creates some possibility for legal reform. But you also talk about in your book and elsewhere, kind of like what different things unions could do to operate within the rigged and god-awful rules that currently exist. One of the most interesting one of which, and maybe for a lot of people the most counterintuitive, and you sort of you kind of referred to it in passing earlier, but I want to make this a little bit more explicit, is letting go maybe of seeking exclusive representation in every case, maybe embracing minority unionism as a strategy. So not, on purpose, not every, like you're not trying to have, what we would currently, in the United States, which is a crucial qualifier, in the United States, consider to be a union shop, where you have one union that's won the legal right to represent everybody there, that you actually think that there are benefits to not always pursuing that.
How into the weeds can I get here?
Medium.
Okay. Unions were organized in this country largely on an exclusive basis, but it was also on a basis of we, the union, are going to train the workers to do the job of forging steel, of electrician work, etc. And then you only can get workers from the union. That's in the DNA of unions. And so when the NLRB framework came around, where it was like, you get certified, a group of workers can say, we're a union, you have to bargain with us. And that really was what the NLRB was meant to say. There's 5 of us here. Even though there's 500 workers, there's 5 of us that want to be a member of this union. You have to bargain with the 5 of us. And so in the early days of the NLRB, it was certifying these sort of minority unions of like, there's 5 people say that they're members of the UAW. You got to bargain with those 5 people. And what happened is, again, partly there's this vestigial notion of like everybody should be in the union. Partly you had the fact that the AFL and the CIO were competing, and the AFL had a sort of an organizational strategy of every electrician should be ours, and every carpenter should be theirs, and every broom sweeper should belong to the broom sweepers union. And the CIO was like, no, like everybody that works for GM should be in the same union, General Motors. And they were doing jurisdictional fights in these competitive elections under the NLRB. And so the NLRB was Roosevelt's thing. and the CIO was very, was loyal to Roosevelt. And so the CIO started to want to get exclusive certifications in order to stop the AFL from saying, these 5 workers belong to us, and just carving up the bargaining unit and like dividing up the unit. And so they were getting it. And so then you had these exclusive units, but you didn't necessarily have agency fee or the union shop. You didn't have the principle that everybody had to join the union. But the unions were winning wage increases every year. So everybody was joining because like it was pretty sweet. It's like, thank you. Another $2, $2 an hour wage. Yeah, I'm joining. Then comes World War II, and the unions, out of a feeling of patriotism, commit to a no strike. We're not going to strike for the war because, the GM factories were now making bombs and bombers to defeat the Nazis. Yeah, we should probably build as many bombers as possible to kill as many Nazis as possible. That's probably a good thing for society. Right. But then Roosevelt's War Labor Board froze wages, and you had workers that were dealing with factory lines that were getting sped up, inflation, because inflation was going crazy during the war, and no ability to strike. And their only form of protest was to quit the union in protest. And so the unions were dealing with this devastating loss of dues revenue and membership. And they were pleading with the War Labor Board, like, you gotta fix this for us, or else we're gonna have to give up the no strike, agreement. And the War Labor Board created this formula called maintenance of membership, which is basically contract is signed. Everybody who's a member today has to stay a member for the rest of the contract, which evolved into agency fee and union shop. And so that's where we're at in terms of what a union is. And so today most contracts have a no strike clause, which is basically a contract term of year, 5 years, 7 years, starting to get longer and longer, that says like, these are the wage increases, this is our arbitration process, this is the grievance process, and if you have a grievance, you take it to the grievance process, but there will be no strikes. And it has a very fairly all-encompassing management's rights clause that lets the boss make a lot of fairly substantial decisions about like subcontracting or whatever. And in my experience, organizing new unions where like this is all still sort of de facto, like the boss is going to expect a management's rights clause and an arbitration clause, and that's what we're trading for a union shop clause or an agency fee clause. I have seen way too many. Look, it's very hard to get a strike wave going in this country. It's very hard. If workers need to see other workers go out on strike and be inspired by them going out on strike and winning, or even not winning but still getting their job back. And so you've got 10% of the workforce that has a union but are locked up by these clauses that say you can't go on strike. And worse than that is that I have seen so many wildcat strikes in like tiny units of, teachers districts, charter schools, whatever, where like the boss does something completely outrageous and the workers rightly are like, we're not coming in today. And the staff rep needs to show up and say, they can fire you, you got to go back to work.
Yeah, they're legally obligated to do that.
They're legally obligated to do that.
In fact, this is
devastating. It's devastating.
Yeah, we had in the book you have a really remarkable example of that from 4 years ago, from the inauguration of Donald Trump.
Oh yeah, the Rockettes. Yeah, the Rockettes did not want to dance in their short dresses for the pussy grabber in chief. And so a bunch of them refused to do it, and their union had to put out a press release saying you have to do this or you're fired. At the same exact time that the taxi drivers, who under the law are not technically workers, don't have a union contract, were striking, at the airports over, the threatened Muslim ban. And that was the contrast. It was terrible. It was really embarrassing. Like, it's just so defeatist. If you're like a non-union worker for like, why should I join a union? Here's a group of workers that don't technically have a union, and they're going on strike. Here's a group of workers who are having a fairly reasonable objection to not tap dancing for a rapist. And they're the ones that are being told by their union leaders, you got to go back. And so one of the things that I'm pointing to is that this is only exclusive representation makes this possible. Because what makes the union responsible for enforcing the no strike clause is the fact that the union, it represents everybody, and everybody's got to belong to the union, or at least they're bound by the contract. And if you peel that back and you go back to what the NLRA was meant to do, which was to certify a members-only union, I'm only bound by this contract if I sign up with this union, then you create these really interesting possibilities where maybe another group of workers forms some other kind of union to do a temporary protest to say we're not going to tap dance for Donald Trump. And they're not bound by the no strike clause any longer.
Yeah, and you and look, there's a lot more we could say about that. I think as you'd be the first to acknowledge, there are advantages and disadvantages to this approach that you're talking about. But another point that you've made to me, and you make in the book, is actually odd little bit of ideological convergence. Is the same point that Thaddeus Russell made here a few weeks ago, which is that there is some historical evidence that non-exclusivity, having to compete for members with other unions, has in some cases been an incentive to engage in more militant tactics to bring home the goods for workers. So I think there's a lot more that we could say about that, but I want to move on to a couple of other things. Do you have like another 20 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
All right, cool.
So on that, I don't want to say like I'm a cockeyed. I'm not like, this is the way to the strike. Like, it's not. Like, I'm pointing to like a crazy sci-fi experiment here. And like my friend Chris Brooks from Labor Notes, he's always quick to point out that like unions, like public sector unions compete in Tennessee, and it only leads to like more conservative union strategies. And that's true. And like, I'm pointing to like these crazy experiences out of like 1934 in the hotels where like there was a Trotskyite union, there was an anarchist union, there was a communist union, and there was a mobster union. And like, it's not even like we're comparing apples and oranges. We're comparing like chopped, ground beef and cucumbers. It's so bizarre. But I do think what it creates is some opportunity for a little bit more of a rank and file rebellion. And we just need more of that in the air, because and here's what I'd say: if the bosses are determined to break the basic elements of labor peace, and labor peace depends upon exclusive representation and agency fee and no strike clauses and all that, but Janus is them saying like, no, we're not interested. It really does beg a couple of people saying like, we'll show you what the lack of labor peace means. And that's more of a left strategy. I really much rather do this in like auto factories in Detroit than public schools in Tennessee.
Yeah, fair enough. Joined by current affairs editor Nathan Robinson. Shaun, do you know Nathan?
I do not, no, but I know the name.
Hello, Shaun. Nice to meet you. I've just been looking up your book as I've been listening to you, because everything you've been saying has made me fascinated and want to read it. So I'm gonna get a copy right away.
Let's sell me 23 copies from your followers.
Should write some labor stuff for current affairs, but yeah. So there are a couple things that I wanted to talk about while you're both here. I want to talk about what has just been happening to Nathan in a few minutes, It's of course the primary reason that we invited him on, beyond always enjoying his presence and his commentary. But first, while you're both here, wanted to switch gears a little bit. Speaking of the lack of class peace, Forrest, do you want to set this up for us? The Indian farmers thing.
Yeah. So there's a really good description of it. I don't know if we really have time to watch it, but Vijay Prashad was on Weekends yesterday on the Jacobin channel and did a really good kind of analysis of how this all got started. Basically, Modi has passed these 3 farmer bills in the name of like reform and progress, which obviously amounts to like a neoliberal crackdown on the fact that in places like Kerala, where farmers kind of rely on this, they have a minimum support price. So basically, the government will set a floor on how much each crop is worth. So if a crop isn't selling that well at the moment, the government will basically buy out farmers who don't manage to sell to bigger farmers or to distributors. So Modi's farm bills basically would impact that and would make it so that, because this isn't codified into law, it's kind of just an agreement that the Indian government has with farmers and peasants, that they'll set this price usually. So there's a movement to codify that into law, and Modi's bills would basically do the opposite and would open up the free market so that there's no price limit, there's nothing. It's just that anyone can come in from the U.S. or anywhere else and just say, hey, we don't want to pay this much for your crops like anymore, and basically give you nothing for them. So this set off a series of strikes, which ended up with workers and manufacturers, like these huge amounts of groups, 250 million people, striking, which is the big, 250 million. So it's 200. Yeah, no, it's the biggest strike in history that's ever been recorded.
Yeah, so not and these are like small holding independent farmers, that we're talking about here. So it's not a labor strike, but it's
labor has joined in solidarity. So Jacobin wrote a really good piece about it that I can pull up that kind of explains it. So workers began striking in other sectors. That's how it became such a big strike.
Yeah, so I mean, this is just worth worth noting and giving at least a minute or two too, since this is kind of an astonishing thing that this is something that I think you could watch a lot of hours of cable news and spend a lot of hours reading the mainstream press and have no idea that this is going on, or maybe every now and again run into a passing mention of it.
Well, when it first happened, I checked which publications were covering it. Only really Jacobin, Common Dreams, and like the progressive press in the U.S. was covering it. Like, and now they've started covering it because you really can't you can't ignore it. But the Indian government has been cracking down on journalists and basically have raided even like journalists, like the homes of journalists, to try to get information about before they could publish it. Hold on, I'm going to pull up the Vijay Prashad thing really fast. It's a couple minutes because he really explains it a lot better.
Yeah. All right. So let's watch just a couple minutes of Vijay Prashad. Give Nathan and Shaun a chance to weigh in, and then we'll switch gears to the original subject.
There's a long-standing dynamic in capitalism that erodes the ability of farmers and agricultural workers to make a living. This is a long history. So let's not forget that history. It's been a very long struggle for farmers and agricultural workers to survive against the entire profit system, not just what's happening in India today. This long-term problem is what provoked in the United States, for instance, the suicides during the farm consolidations, the monopoly control of farms in the 1980s. You might remember the Farm Aid concerts in the United States and so on. This is a very long-term issue that I'd just like to have us put on the table. More closely in terms of India, last year, in the middle of the pandemic, the Indian government, the extreme right government led by Narendra Modi, Prime Minister Modi, pushed through 3 farm bills and 2 labor bills, all basically along the lines of the International Monetary Fund's so-called, rationalization, liberalization policy. In terms of the labor bills, it's called basically, there's a kind of labor rationalization that's needed. What they mean is, of course, labor needs to be defeated. These farm bills are very, very much an attack on farmers and on agricultural workers in the following 2 ways at least. Firstly, they allow big corporate entities to enter and to come in and dominate the marketplace, the mandi, where the small farmers, medium farmers bring their goods to sell. So there is this issue of who controls the mandi. Secondly, the Food Corporation of India, the FCI, which used to have a commanding role in the mandi, in this marketplace, would come in, would buy, the product brought to the market by the small farmers, medium farmers, and so on. And by doing this, the Food Corporation of India did 2 simultaneous things. On the one side, it enabled a floor price for the farmers. If there was insufficient demand for the farmers' products, the Food Corporation would buy up, whatever they were selling and ensure that there was a minimum support price for them in terms of their incomes. On the other,
that's the beginning kind of just explaining the floor price thing, which is what I wanted to bring up. More than the strike itself, just kind of as part of the same subject of what could be done without. I mean, in certain places, what could be done without necessarily passing something like the PRO Act and without necessarily relying on unions. It's an interesting example that that doesn't exist here, but it's an example of something that that can be done to help out farmers and laborers.
So are you just kind of thinking in terms of like wildcat strike outside of official channels, or you want to spell out the connection a little bit more you were thinking of?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is. It's the biggest wildcat strike ever. You know what I mean? Like in history that's ever been recorded, because it's like it's been huge, and I think he explains it later on in that clip. But yeah, that was kind of the connection.
All right. So I do want to switch gears in a minute, but either of you guys have anything you want to add?
I sort of lost track of Indian politics a while ago. It also just got really depressing as it went further in a sort of Hindu nationalist direction. I used to organize a lot of Indian workers in higher ed, postdoctoral research associates, and I love them. It was almost like a reminder of it was like an echo of dealing with like Cuban folks, where it's like you're either here or there. It was just totally polarized, and particularly a lot of folks coming out of Uttar Pradesh, which is this state in India that like sort of routinely elects communist governments, where like 9 out of 10 of the Indian scientists that I would organize would be like, give me that card. When are we going on strike? And then there was this one that would be like, oh no, the union's ruined my dad's life. You don't understand. It's like, well, I think I know why they ruined your dad's life, and I'm not sure I'm sympathetic. But it's sort of really tragic to see the directions that things have moved in India. Once upon a time, I felt like India was this model for like moving towards a sort of, secularist, multi-ethnic democracy, and instead it's like pre-Trumpist.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly true that I share Shaun's kind of depression. It's in the direction of Indian politics, considering that and considering that this example of this vibrant tradition of the Indian left and of resistance. But as Forrest was saying, one of the things that strikes me about this is that as a media, as a person who's always thinking about media and runs a small outlet, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is just how non-existent coverage of vastly important global stories is in the American press. I mean, Americans are basically, essentially, the rest of the world doesn't exist in the American press. It's not real. Occasionally, if something truly catastrophic happens, it gets 2 minutes. But it really is the case. I mean, we know there have been studies that have sort of shown the value of a life by country in the American press. But it's, I mean, I don't think we necessarily notice that there's actually been a real serious change. Like CNN, for example, they either completely shut down CNN International or they gutted CNN International, which used to be a serious part of their operation was international news. But of course, it turned out that people wanted to watch Donald Trump. So because they want to watch Donald Trump, because they don't want to hear about Indian politics, they're never going to find out that. I mean, it's almost worse with coverage of, for example, Mexico, where things that are 10 feet on the other side of the U.S. border are treated as non-existent. And this is hundreds of millions of people involved in something hugely consequential for global politics, and the U.S. publication that's covering the most is Jacobin. A small socialist bi-monthly, right? It's really just such a disgrace.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I'm glad you devoted a few minutes to it.
Even like Al Jazeera got gutted and moved to like a mostly online service, which I think for a long time people got most of their international news from there at different times. Like, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of coverage of global news in U.S. outlets, Nathan is of course the editor of Current Affairs until very recently. He was also a columnist for The Guardian. I don't know if this is recent enough. I don't know if his Twitter bio has been updated yet. So this is a significant thing. I should say. You wrote an article about this in Current Affairs. People can read for some of the details. I think Forrest has that too as a graphic. But I think some people maybe have the very mistaken impression that if they see someone's name a lot and there's some sort of media organization attached to them, that they are just like rolling in money from this. Being the editor of Current Affairs means that you have like the Scrooge McDuck pool of gold coins to swim around in,
There's an impression that left media is far more lucrative than left media in fact is.
Yeah, so this is like a significant portion of your income is what you're getting from.
It's about a quarter. Yeah, I did the column. So I made about $15,000 a year from The Guardian.
Yeah. And this is also, I thought it'd be good to have a little overlap from Shaun, because when they fired you, part of their explanation of it, when they ended up acknowledging the issue and publicly acknowledging it, the original email from the Guardian editor said private and confidential, which I think is a classic.
Not anymore.
Which is a classic thing to say, when you're firing somebody for for extremely controversial reasons you just lost your job. By the way, don't tell anyone.
I think it's this email, right? This is the one.
That's the second email. That's the email I sent. That's the toadying, obsequious email I sent in reply to his original email, where I realized that my job is on the line and promised to delete the tweets and behave. Didn't make a difference, but
so when they did publicly acknowledge this, part of what they said is, yeah, okay, sure, he was a columnist. He's no longer a columnist, and yeah, it was totally because of this tweet, which we'll get into what the tweet was, but said that, but they're not firing you. That was what they said, because you don't have a real contract, which is an interesting.
Well, this is why it's kind of interesting to have Shaun here, because it struck me. My first thought was this was an issue about the Palestine exception to free speech, which is very much true in the media. But as I was writing the article and thinking about exactly what happened, it was also very clearly a story about just employer power, and a kind of fascinating example of how that works in media, where when the editor emailed me and said, I'm very dissatisfied with your tweet, I realized that basically I had a choice where I needed to either delete that tweet fast or lose my job. He didn't say you were going to lose your job. He just made sure that it's clear that he was pissed. And I think, well, are these tweets worth $15,000 a year to me? Would I pay that? Would I lose that money to keep these tweets? And I don't want to die on the hill of a joke tweet. And so I look back and I realize just how panicked I was, realizing that the Guardian essentially had complete control. If they told me they didn't want me to tweet something, there was very little I could do unless I was prepared to just say, go fuck yourself. I don't need the money. And the fact is that I was only able to write about this in such detail and really just burn my bridges and torch the place because I have another gig. I have current affairs, and it pays me enough money that I can live on, and I don't need another newspaper column. But that's that's power, right? I had an independent source of power in the form of money. And so I could do that, but the Guardian really had such control over me. And the Guardian is unionized, right? The full-time staff have a union, but the columnists don't. We don't have contracts. They can fire us anytime. And in the statement they put out, they go he says he was fired. He wasn't fired. We terminated him as a columnist, but they have no job security.
Yeah, and this is, and of course, as non-trivial, as this is for somebody in your position. I mean, actually, I think reading the story, I started feeling a little physically panicky because I could over-identify with with what this might feel like, sort of stringing together a bunch of things that none of them have that kind of job security, but this also, of course, as you say, you're in a relatively okay position compared to a lot of people. And this is something that's been a theme of a lot of Shaun's work, is that that the labor movement should more aggressively pursue maybe legal strategy in some contexts, certainly at least the rhetorical strategy of talking about free speech in the workplace.
And just like the idea that you have a right to your job is, I think, a thing that we lost. A lot of the early labor movement in America was based on the idea of you owe me something, boss. You can't just oh, we're done, you're out of here. And so I think some of that, I think a lot of that notion did actually wind up in the 13th Amendment, the one outlawing slavery and involuntary servitude. It was this notion we were fighting for. And in the drafting of the original National Labor Relations Act in 1935, it was actually a real fight. And again, back to the AFL and the CIO being opposing labor institutions, the CIO being closer to Roosevelt and looking for big sort of institutional change, whereas the AFL had more of this tradition of no, workers have rights, and the AFL was fighting for, you should root the NLRA in the 13th Amendment, and we should be fighting for a right to your job. and it's completely gone. And partly in America, and like in America, our rights are even worse than those in the UK. Partly because, you know, we had such a smashing success in those New Deal years and in the World War II years, where, you know, job security got tied to a union contract, and we got to the point where, you know, 1 in 3 workers had a union. And so the other 2 out of 3, most employers just sort of matched those benefits. And so people generally had job security in this country because it was just the right thing to do, or the smart thing to do, or the thing to do not to get sued. And that has clearly gone away. And it's got, I mean, you know, in the last, you know, in this century, employers have been acting with impunity to the point where this idea of just cause as a job right is gaining traction. In the UK, I think that it is a law on the books, but the UK has been drawing from America's labor laws to find all these carve-outs, right? And this is as we're debating this idea of you know, I mean, what we just got job protections, you know, just cause protections for like a couple thousand fast food workers in New York City, and you know, like, we're going to see how enforcement works on that. California, the great liberal mecca, is terrified to introduce this. We're so far from that. But what we're seeing in the rest of the world are these sort of neoliberal carve-outs to this notion of a universal job protection, and the employers are just having a field day with it.
Have you read Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher, Shaun?
I haven't.
Oh, well,
he
has this theory, and well, not theory, but he's talking about like the idea of post-Fordism being like that 70s moment where kind of the manufacturing industry starts to deindustrialize, and also kind of the idea, I guess, the propaganda and the idea that workers are kind of taught, like workers kind of think, well, bosses kind of propagandize to workers that they don't need job security as much as they kind of need options. And there's the idea that kind of in some way, like the propaganda kind of got to workers as well.
Flexibility, I think they call it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all out there, but also it's all such clear horseshit at this point. Like, I mean, you know, even before COVID, you know, unemployment rates were so low that it's like, oh, all of our spreadsheets and our economic theorems indicate that people should be getting raises, but it's like, yeah, except one company concentrates its jobs in one shithole, you know, county in Mississippi, and then you have monopsony power, and yeah, like people have there is no mobility when there's one boss in the city. Like we've reinvented the company town.
Yeah. Oh man, we should have thrown in monopsony in the Glenn Beck article when we were teaching basic economics.
There we go. I always like it when economists are trying to puzzle out. Well, it says here that wages should be increasing, but they're not.
Which is just like, I mean, just hand them the Oscar at that point. Like, it's just really great acting. Like, are you kidding me? Do you really believe this?
It's also what happens when you detach class as a concept, and when you detach kind of power from economic like theories.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, like things aren't within, like it's within it's within employers' interest not to give raises, like to make the most money possible. And and if you're not thinking that way, like if you're not like, well, you know, worker, like money should be going up, and it's like, but not if someone decides it's not in their interest and has all the power in that situation.
Yeah, and not if and some of this is also just like you have these very simple a priori models that in all sorts of ways, you know, don't map on in any kind of like micro way to the real world, like the same way that the models will say that, you know, people that companies will respond to increased demand with like short-term price increases, and they'll really just respond by leaving a lot of unfilled orders, you know, in the warehouse for a while. But in this case, it is certainly an issue about class power. But I of course, Oh, sorry, Shaun. Did you want to jump in before we?
Yeah, one of the main things I'm really pressing on in my book is like, how we have to get these sort of like all in systems of labor rights and representation, because as much if things are based upon your right is tied to your job, this is where these things start to flow down, right? And like, there's a union at the Guardian, right? But like, they can find these carve outs. Whereas if you could find ways where it's like, this is what every writer deserves for this, whatever economic tier that this publication falls into, and there's going to be courts involved in enforcing them, that gets a lot closer, and like, so much of what went wrong with labor in America was everything was tied to the job. And because the courts like carved out these major loopholes where like the bosses could, they were entitled to make these major decisions about their economic bottom line, things got subcontracted, things got offshored, things got, farmed out, and it just carves out. And so even as we're in this moment where like, we're gently starting to slide into this debate of like, do workers deserve just cause protections? The whole framework in America is still one where it's like, it should be based upon the job that you're at and based upon whether you are technically classified as a full-time worker. And it's like, well, that's how we just all are going to wind up as freelancers, and it doesn't matter anyway.
It also leads to the Biden thing, I guess, where his big like concern trolling thing about Medicare for all was like, oh, do you really want to give up like your union health care that you fought so hard for?
I'm less mad at him than I am at the Mayo Pete. I think Mayo Pete was like the most dishonest fucking grub in that whole debate. I mean, everything about it was just so
no argument from me.
So dishonest.
Yeah.
And also, like, I mean, I worked for a labor center where like building trades apprentices are learning on the job and earning a college degree simultaneously. And like his whole like, oh, it's one or the other. It's like, no, it's not. Get the hell out of here.
Yeah, and I should mention, by the way, small tangent, but for I think the definitive Mayo Pete article was.
I hated him so much. I wrote 10,000 words about him. I started reading his memoir.
Way more than you deserve.
I don't know if there's anyone in politics I've hated more than this man.
Yeah.
By the way, how does he deserve a memoir? Like, who the fuck is publishing this? Like, at the time he ran, he already had a memoir.
Bestseller for us. It sold.
Yeah. So yeah, that article is all about Pete. But I will say though, on the subject of Biden's use in the primary of that argument that Medicare for all means that you're going to lose your union health insurance coverage, what I immediately thought of is, having read this book, Tell the Bosses We're Coming by Shaun Richman, I know that part of the reason why the labor movement switched gears from their previous strategy and started bargaining for health insurance was the unfortunately very mistaken belief that if employers were saddled with having to provide insurance themselves, they would stop opposing single-payer national health insurance because they would have an economic incentive to support it.
Well, it wasn't quite that. Actually, Nelson Lichtenstein digs up this amazing quote from like the 1948 CIO convention. It's in his biography of Walter Reuther. And it's, Walter Reuther and the CIO unions were really wedded to a social democratic vision of expanding Social Security to cover healthcare. And one of the things that happened during the war is that during that wage freeze, the War Labor Board said, well, but you can bargain for fringe benefits. And it was mostly the AFL unions that bargained for fringe benefits. And it's mostly the AFL unions that started getting health care covered by employers. The CIO unions held out for a really long time, 1947, 1948, where they're just like, you know, and maybe 1950, like by the time that like Eisenhower is president, and so you got a Republican House and you got a Republican president, and it's just like, we're not going to touch the Social Security Act for a number of years. And a delegate on the floor says, we can't wait 10 more years. We have to start bargaining for health insurance in the next round of contracts. And that's what's amazing to me is our American national solution to healthcare was a 5-year compromise on a 10-year problem. And now you got like Mayor Pete and Biden holding it out as like this like you know, like this is what we're about. This is why we did it. It's like, no, it was a patchwork. It was never meant to be this. And
that was an argument though that was used. I'm remembering that, right? Like, or did I just make that up for the book when the CIO came around that employers would support national health insurance if they had to pay for it?
I'm not recalling that. It could be. I mean, you know, it's been a while since I could forget. Definitely, I mean, the unions that negotiated health insurance were in the 1960s at the forefront of fighting for the original Medicare Act. And you know, sort of, and part of this was, it was like, oh, if we could get our 65 plus people off of our healthcare plans, it's going to save us a bunch of money. And that was like a little bit of a deal with the devil in the 65 Medicare Act. But in terms of unions today, the dynamic that I see is there are unions that have these sort of multi-employer healthcare plans that give them real power and actually aid in their organizing. And then there's unions that bargain healthcare one-on-one with their employer, where they just deal with healthcare as a thing that's thrown on the table as a concessionary item on day one. And so, you know, we saw the culinary union, Local 227 of Unite Here, sort of try to come at Bernie during the primaries on this issue. And they're a winner in the healthcare politics of the United States. That any non-union hotel, restaurant, or casino in Las Vegas, if they sign with the union, they probably save money on their healthcare costs. And I knew this from New York. I used to work for the New York Hotel Trades Council, where, you know, if it was a hotel that had 100 employees and it was non-union, and we went on strike against them, we came to them, it was like, here's the actuarial tables, and we could save you like $5 an hour in healthcare cost if you sign with us. It was this major gain. Meanwhile, like if you're in the Communication Workers of America and you're bargaining with Verizon and that's your only employer, Verizon comes in on day one saying, copay, this is how much more the premiums are costing us. We think you should pay us $1,000 more a year. Here's what your copay should be, et cetera, et cetera. So it is like a real winners and losers system. I am firmly convinced that if we don't have Medicare for all, it's going to be very difficult for the labor movement to gain new members and to win new shops. But the power politics of the AFL-CIO, it's really dominated by the unions that are winners under the healthcare system. Unions that have these multi-employer healthcare systems where it actually does help them organize. That said, you know, my good friend just became the president of the New York Hotel Trades Council Union, and there are very few hotel workers with jobs right now. And I know that he spent 6 or 7 months doing round the clock bargaining over healthcare premiums to keep their healthcare clinics. They pay the doctors. The doctors are on salary for this joint labor management fund. And it took everything in them. And I think they eventually, they worked out some deal where everybody's going on Medicaid. One day when he's not still doing round the clock bargaining over healthcare, I want to get him out for drinks and just see if like he still thinks this is working for them. Because unions like that are the ones you got to flip to get the entire AFL-CIO to say we need Medicare for all because this is killing us. Because it is actually killing us, but it's killing some of us quicker than others.
Well, on that note,
we're all gonna die.
Shaun, you've got to come back a bunch of times. Please, everybody, buy his book. It is Tell the Bosses That We're Coming. You can buy it, I know, from I think you can buy it from all the usual places. You can buy it from Powell's, I think, which is at least a union shop. You could
directly from Monthly Review Press.
Directly from Monthly Review Press. You can buy it from Red Emma's, which is a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore. You can buy books from online, but everybody buy Shaun's book. Shaun, please do come back very soon. Known Shaun for a very long time.
Please come back to my dining room table the first chance you get.
Yeah.
Let's do some Trivial Pursuit or something.
Yes. Post plague, we will absolutely do that
in the future when all is well.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Thanks, brother.
All right.
Now, the labor law, job security aspect aside, the real question is whether, in fact, Nathan's firing would have passed just cause threshold because of his wildly, horrendously anti-Semitic tweet. So let's do. Do you have a tweet for us?
Yeah.
Let's look at the. Here it is.
There it is. Did you know that U.S. Congress is not? So this is about when the COVID relief, the grotesquely inadequate COVID relief was being passed. At the same time, there's a bunch of new U.S. military aid to Israel, and so Nathan tweets out this honestly very mildly jokey tweet. Says, "Did you know that the U.S. Congress is not actually permitted to authorize any new spending unless a portion of it is directed towards buying weapons for Israel? It's the law." And then, this is my favorite part, or if actually not the written law, second tweet, then so ingrained in political custom as to functionally be indistinguishable from law. Because even when we figured this out, the thought crossed his mind, oh my God, if somebody takes
what
this.
if someone's so naive or operating in bad faith? Well, you and Katie Halper on her show the other night put me on trial and exonerated me on anti-Semitism charges, but convicted me on offenses to comedy, a comedic malpractice for explaining the joke after telling it.
Yes, I stand by. I stand by both.
She called me today and asked me if I saw that, if I watched the stream, and I was like, oh, I didn't get a chance to. And then she's like, watch it, and like put it on, I guess, Instagram. Was like really excited that she had thought of doing that.
Yeah, I should say that I'm part Jewish, wasn't raised as anything. I didn't want to make these caveats because I didn't want to step on her bit and be convicted of offenses against comedy myself. I might also, as I pointed out I did point out at the time, I might be, I think I would be wildly disqualified from any actual tribunal on this subject. But I do think, since I've known Nathan, for a while, we wrote an article together. He blurred my book, but I mean, this is a very strange because I want to get into this a little bit because this is a deeply strange thing. The first charge, the anti-Semitism charge, and because on the face of it, this is just bizarre. I mean, this is like saying if you said. If you were complaining in parallel terms about U.S. military aid to the House of Saud, would that be Islamophobia? Would anyone even say that was Islamophobia? If you were complaining about the U.S. backing of the semi-fascist Modi administration in India. Well, actually, some people.
Yeah, they would jump.
Well,
they would 100%.
No, but this is the thing. Is that this is often used to exempt governments from criticism. This charge of singling out the idea, and in fact, the editor said in the email to me that I was singling out the only Jewish state. And a parallel to it is actually the way that the United States immunizes itself from criticism by calling people anti-American. This has been long been one of the main charges levied at Noam Chomsky is, why do you single out the United States for all of this criticism? You must hate America uniquely. You must be, because you're critiquing America. And so that's a great way for any country to say, well, why are you picking on us? You must have some sort of strange bias against us because you didn't talk about every other country simultaneously, which is impossible.
And it feeds into the woke discourse of when it's at least Israel, or when it's pro Modi troll accounts are actually really good at doing that too.
Yeah, well, I was going to say I actually do. It struck me as I was doing that last week that when people were, in my view, rightly criticizing Tulsi Gabbard for her being, making some supportive comments about Modi, for laying a wreath on him. That's not the right word, but whatever, you know what I mean, the garland, whatever that was. Then there were people saying that raising this issue was like anti-Hindu, prejudice.
Yeah, I had the misfortune of managing the TMBS YouTube channel while the simultaneous Tulsi Gabbard criticism videos were going up and Andrew Yang criticism videos were going up.
The two most well-adjusted groups of So do you have Forrest? Do you have the emails from the Guardian editor? Because I think
well, I can just pull them up on the actual article. I feel like might be the easiest way to do it. I have them as its own thing, but I have the one that isn't the.
I assume you're not going to read them in an Irish accent like Katie Halbert did the other night.
No, I am not going to make any.
But if anyone does want to hear the emails read in an Irish accent, so first, if you could just scroll up to the first email from the original email from John Mulholland, because this is my reply to his original email.
Oh yeah, there it is. Private and confidential.
Yeah. Private and confidential. So much for that.
Can you expand that for us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a little bit better?
If you click it, it should go full. I think it.
There we go. Hi there. So Nathan, hi there. As you, in fact, to be more legit,
we experience this. Every time anyone reads this, I get the pit in my stomach again that I got when I opened this email the first time.
This is trauma therapy.
As you partly present yourself as a Guardian columnist, i.e., I think what he means is that in like the Twitter bio and things like that, it listed the things you do, and it listed one of those.
But note that there's this weird, subtle, like almost suggestion that I'm not a Guardian columnist, that I'm like presenting myself as a Guardian columnist. He says that twice, I think. Present yourself, and I thought,
that was your official title. Yes, I mean, like that's
my title was columnist. It says on the website, Nathan Robinson's Guardian U.S. columnist.
As you partially present yourself as a Guardian columnist, allow me to express my concern when you make an assertion such as this, which is the first amazing part of this, that is treating what. I mean, I just have to think that anybody who's made out of human parts understands as a joke, as an assertion. No such law.
Oh, really? You know,
clearly, Nathan, you thought that this was an actual law, but just to be clear,
but thanks for that.
there's no actual law saying this. In which case, this is, as one might say, if You know,
That's massive.
That's an interesting way to put it too. As one might say, fake news, irrespective of the later tweet, where you say it is indistinguishable from law. It is not law.
Irrespective.
So it doesn't matter that you even committed this offense against comedy and said, just to be clear, that was a joke. I know it's not a law.
No, because it's irrespective of that.
Yes.
Somehow.
Yes. Given the reckless talk over the last year and beyond of how mythical Jewish groups / alliances, and it's funny, that's in quotes, although I don't think that's actually a quote from anyone, but who knows.
Reckless? What is he talking about? Like, is he talking about just general anti-Semitism? Like, was there a particular?
Yeah, I'm very curious actually about whether he thinks he's quoted somebody or.
He might be referring to like the Ilhan Omar smears that came out about like money and
Ilhan Omar said, actually use those words.
Oh no, not as a quote. I'm saying just trying to, I guess, place the context of, because he says I thought he said within the last year. Yeah.
Given the reckless talk over the last year, so it's a little unclear why, in particular, the last year. I should also say that the Guardian does have a history of going along with this sort of thing. That in their British incarnation, they were very much part of the smear campaign against Jeremy Corbyn on the same charge. So it's possible that he's throwing a lot of different things, some of which are maybe actual anti-Semitism, some of which might be obliviousness to anti-Semitism, some of which might just be made up bullshit about anti-Semitism into whatever he's referring to as the reckless talk over the course of the last year.
Maybe you overheard something at a party.
Over mythical Jewish groups / alliances yield power over forms of U.S. public life. I am not clear how this is helpful to public discourse, and we could pause here to ask whether it's great for employers to be making determinations about whether everything an employee tweets is useful to public discourse.
My tweets mandatory that all of my tweets be useful to the public. I mean, if that had been the standard, just to point out, I should have been fired like the day I got the job, right? Because
Twitter itself is detrimental to public discourse.
Exactly. If that's the standard we're going to hold tweets to, then everyone should be fired.
Yeah.
And that is the liberals' ultimate goal. Everybody fired.
I mean, that's right. I mean, obviously,
there'll be one person employed, and there'll be a HR rep.
Yeah. Good. It'll be amazing. Actually, you should just have instead of just hitting post when you finish composing a tweet, what you should hit is submit, and there'll be a process to determine whether it's useful to public discourse.
Useful to public discourse, and then and no tweet will ever be posted again.
That's right. And I'm not sure why singling out financial aid to Israel in a tweet and devoid of any context, which is also interesting because.
Context, which is really easy to put in a tweet, is the context of U.S. foreign aid.
Yeah, no, I mean those 280 characters, you've got plenty of room to put all the context anybody might want about how the budget process works, the history of the U.S. role in the Israel-Palestine conflict. So it's devoid of any context. You didn't include any of that, and without mention of aid to other countries. Either currently or historically, is a useful addition to public discourse. So the just
public discourse.
Yeah. So the claim is that in that tweet, you should have brought up all the other countries that the U.S. Engages in military aid to, even though one. I think that there is actually a disanalogy here, which is that American politicians, they certainly give they certainly vote for military aid to lots of places that I wish they would not vote to military aid to. But they don't go on and on and on about what an important point of principle it is for them to give this aid.
Right.
Like, I mean, undeniable.
I didn't create the special relationship with Israel. That's not a function of my tweet. That's a function of United States politics. Joe Biden's the one who said if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. And Nancy Pelosi's the one who said if Washington, D.C. crumbled to the ground, the last thing that would remain is our support for Israel.
Exactly. Flip in the comment says, "Why did he single out Main Street for his walk?" Which does kind of get to the core of the issue, because one of the fun things about this what about all the other countries' defense, which, as you say, is often used as a defense of U.S. policy or a way to accuse people of being anti-American for opposing it. And was used in the 70s and 80s by defenders and representatives of apartheid South Africa to oppose the movement for divestment from South Africa. So why are they singling out South Africa? Lots of countries commit human rights abuses. So what's so special about South Africa? Which the fun thing about that is because you can literally always play that game. So if you can't criticize anyone when you could criticize someone else instead, like the end result of that is that you just can't criticize anyone. You are free, of course, to use Twitter.
You are free to be fired.
Yeah, right. Which actually does get to what does get to a really important point, and one that I think goes back to some of the themes from the conversation with Shaun, because I mean that's not much of a you're free to do this if you want to keep your job is not very reassuring. Right? Like this is a point that I remember you made in your article a couple of years ago, actually, when that Janus decision we were talking about earlier was being considered. That the argument that conservatives use to support right to work laws to oppose, making people pay agency fees is that if you make somebody do something as a condition of your job, of keeping your job, having a job, then they're not free to not do it. Which, fair enough.
Yes. Is the only context in which conservatives ever deploy that argument is to say that mandatory union contracts tied to employment are coercive, but mandatory any other requirement an employer could ever impose, not coercive.
Yeah, because you could always just get another job. But somehow the you could always get another job argument doesn't apply to mandatory.
Doesn't apply in the union context.
You're free, of course, to use Twitter in whatever way you choose, but it dismays me that someone who presents themselves as a Guardian columnist would make, as the Guardian website does, would make such a clearly erroneous statement without, as I say, any context / justification. John Mulholland, Guardian, editor-in-chief, and then there's this little extra thing below it. Which
bonus, little lagniappe, as we call it in New Orleans, for that word meaning a little something extra.
Saying that the only Jewish state controls the most powerful country in the world is clearly anti-Semitic. The myth of Jewish power informs murderous hatred. Delete this and apologize, which is actually quite that's a hell of a shift in tone for the little something extra at the end. But
you saying the Jewish people are a weak people, like, you know what I mean? Like the myth of Jewish power would imply that Jewish people are powerless.
So it's also like the remarkable thing about this is in neither of those tweets was there anything actually about there was any sort of causal claim about why there's this U.S. special relationship with Israel. There was only an assertion of the fact that it exists.
The only thing that I suggested was that U.S. politicians give a hell of a lot of weapons aid to Israel. That's basically the joke of the tweet. is that we give so much weapons aid, it might as well be the law that we have to. Like, we can't give COVID relief unless we're also giving weapons aid, right? That's the joke. We just give it law. I didn't say if it's legitimate, if it's, I mean, it's a critique implicitly, but actually, like, it could be that I just think it's a slightly lower priority than COVID relief. Right. Yeah. But I still support it technically from the tweets. Right. You know, as I say, there's no context. So you could interpret that in a way that isn't actually particularly unfavorable to Israel, but is just talking about U.S. political priorities.
Yeah. And like, I think also, I mean, again, it's a completely separate discussion. Like the assertion that these are American political priorities, that politicians, by their own constant explicit statement, do care very, very much about arming and funding Israel to the hilt. That fact could be asserted without having any opinion necessarily about why it is the case. And it's probably like very complicated and multi-causal. I'd point out that that at least one of the causes is that evangelical Christians, right-wing evangelical Christians, are a huge voting bloc and are on the whole extremely committed to this policy. We could talk about U.S. strategic interests. This is like the Chomsky explanation of why this exists. You know, that are sort of served by having that that state that's very that hyper militarized state that's very dependent on the U.S. like there as a kind of watchdog in the region. And yeah, you could talk about pro-Israel lobbying groups, which is what Ilhan Omar got in trouble for. And I've always also thought it was hilarious that in this one context, you're not allowed to suggest that lobbying works, and that there is a reason why people spend a lot of money on it, because it is actually quite effective. But whatever you think about that, you weren't asserting it. And the thing that gets me about this especially is that this rhetorical strategy saying that the only Jewish state in the world, et cetera, is anti-Semitic basically allows Mulholland to say, people, who have Mulholland's views to say that because Israel is the only Jewish state, that means that any criticism of Israel that has any sort of superficial resemblance to anything that, anti-Semites might say about, Jewish people, in general, is thereby anti-Semitic. And we can just skip the whole question of whether any such assertions are true or false, which is a very common thing that I've like that people will say, oh, it's like a blood libel to say that the Israeli military has committed various war crimes, that it's absolutely committed, and it's an incredibly sleazy thing, and honestly one that I find, I mean, I can't believe I'm going to break my usual habit on this. I will end with an as a, right? That they, as someone who does have some Jewish background and has been the recipient of an occasional anti-Semitic, remark in my life, because having inherited these striking Ashkenazi good looks, that's most people's first guess, about my background. I think like, it's incredibly sleazy and dangerous because it cheapens the actual charge of anti-Semitism. It makes people not seriously.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah.
I'm just going to say many of the most, specifically anti-Zionist people that I know are Jewish. Like, what I mean, that I've known in my lifetime. Like, like a lot of Jewish people have very, very real, very pointed criticisms of Israel and are not.
Yeah, and they resent being held responsible for the actions of the Israeli state and having them done in the name of Judaism, which they find really, really appalling. One of this is what motivates, for example, the anger of someone like Norman Finkelstein, who is viciously critical of Israel, but who comes from the perspective of being a Jew whose entire family, other than his parents, perished in the Holocaust, and his parents were both in Auschwitz, and he gets very, very angry at the suffering and death of his family being used to cover up and paper over and justify and rationalize things that he finds to be atrocities. And I think that anger is quite understandable. I don't agree with everything he says, but I think the source of his like emotional anger is very, very understandable to me. Ben, as the sort of as the left's kind of resident logician, you can see kind of how the ugly kind of sophistry here, which is, it's saying that Israel is powerful. Israel is the only Jewish state. Therefore, this is the myth of Jewish power. Right. So if you say Israel is powerful because Israel is the only Jewish state, therefore you're saying Jews are powerful. Therefore you are engaging in anti-Semitism. And so on the kind of implicit logic.
Yeah, which is amazing. It's I mean, this is a version of the fallacy of the undistributed middle. It's literally like saying that that cats are mammals and dogs are mammals, so dogs are cats.
So you can see here that if we accept the logic underlying Mulholland's kind of argument, which he doesn't really make explicit, the logic here, we can never say that Israel is a powerful country. We can never say that Israel has strong influence over United States politics because Israel is the only Jewish state. Therefore, this is the myth of Jewish power, and so it's really ugly. And the implication of it is essentially, if you take seriously what underlies what he's saying, the actual argument, if you try and figure out what the argument is, it really does immunize Israel from criticism.
Yeah, it does, and again, you can, and it has been applied to all sorts of of criticisms. That you say. If you say, the Israeli military, has murdered, Palestinian children, which is the same sentence that you would also correctly say about like the American military and Vietnamese children in the 70s or something like that, then people have and will come back and say, oh well this sounds like medieval libels about Jews killing Christian children, and it's again it really cheapens the accusation of the real thing, which is ugly and serious and not going anywhere. And I also think that the point about Finkelstein and all of that does get to something important, which is that it's important to recognize that no ethnic or religious or cultural national community is a hive mind. They all are divided into different ideologies and different different class interests, different etc. And I think that and look, I think sometimes we on the left fall into to this too, that that we take anything that member of group X says is representative of the group X view on that subject. But it's a very I think it's a bad thing to do in general, and it's also a silly thing to do. And I think you can see it in the way it's sometimes weaponized on the other side in these discussions. Like to pick a non-Israel example, I remember a couple of years ago when when there was the attempted Guaido coup in Venezuela, seeing at least one daughter of a wealthy Venezuelan immigrant.
Oh God, that was fucking ridiculous.
Saying that she was tired of having white American leftists try to Venezuela-splain to her, that
was fucking ridiculous. That video,
opposing the coup, and this is something that can be done in any number of directions. And I don't want to push the point too far, because I think that there is a legitimate, I think sometimes people are saying something legitimate, which is basically, think about ways that not having had certain experiences might blind you to certain things, and fair enough. Right, like that's not a wholly illegitimate thing, but you have to defer to me on this subject because I'm a member of this group thing, is something that runs, yes, as our graphic designer J. Andrew World says in chat, Jewish people aren't the Borg. There are the individual human beings with different political opinions, as is the case with everybody else. I think.
And Adolph Reed talks about, I mean, in the Black community, not the Jewish community, but he talks about it in depth in Class Notes when he's talking about how, I mean, he's criticizing Cornel West at the moment because it was before Cornel West kind of had his come to the left moment, I guess, later on. But it's how he criticizes white leftists in this case for kind of seeing everything through a mediator, and liberals as well, seeing everything through that mediator that kind of has to translate some, like, the language for you. And it's always a member of the bourgeois, and it's always somebody that has a vested interest in the status quo remaining the way it is. Like, I don't know. That was a part of the part of Class Notes that really stuck out to me.
Yeah. It is kind of funny that Reed and West used to have like some really bitter polemical exchanges.
Yeah.
Because now
he devoted 3 chapters to it in Class Notes. I mean, at various times.
Now they're actually quite close. Any case, Nathan, final thoughts about the Guardian and your and this, like I think we've kind of gone through this absurd email. Please.
Well, the real disturbing thing, of course, is that they fired me and they made it clear that it was about the tweet, even though I deleted it and even though I groveled. It didn't help. So don't grovel first, because they'll fire you anyway. That's my one regret here, is that I apologized to him because I thought I could keep my job. Couldn't keep my job, so shouldn't have apologized. Shouldn't have said what I didn't.
Props
really
to you
believe.
for keeping that part in there. You could have just.
Yeah, it doesn't make me look very good. It's shameful, but I wanted to show kind of how the kind of pressure that there is on you to say things that you don't really believe in order to appease your boss and make them lay off you and not fire you. I don't look great, but I'm
panicking. You're about to you're seeing an email that makes it very clear that you can that you're about to lose a massive portion of your income, based on a whim. I mean, I don't know that's that much. I agree with what you're saying, but I could certainly understand how in that moment, well, hell, is there anything I could do to make this, to get out of this, because
save my ass, yeah.
It's not worth it,
it's completely understandable. It's just, still putting it in there is a
yeah. Well, I'm human. What I think is so alarming is that I haven't seen, and forgive me if there are any exceptions, because I don't scroll through Twitter obsessively. So I have not seen other Guardian writers protest my fire. A lot of people have been very kind. They sent very supportive notes. A lot of people have switched their Guardian subscriptions to Current Affairs, which is very nice. But I haven't seen Guardian writers saying anything about this publicly, and I understand why. Right? Because he has the same power over them that he had over me, which is that if they tick him off, they're gone. That's their right. So they have to make a calculation right now, which is, are they willing to give up their fucking writing career for this prestigious post for the sake of something that isn't going to go anywhere? It's not going to get me my job back. So I think it's important to recognize that the people who are still at The Guardian, I've been fired, but are really under the thumb of the editors, even though they're a union company, because poisoning your relationship with them just it hurts you as a writer. And The Guardian is such a gatekeeper because they are the most progressive paper, and this is important. They're not a reactionary paper. They publish articles critical of Israel, right? It's not like they publish nothing against Israel. They do. But The Guardian is this gate, but they want to have complete control over and what their writers say. And and don't say anything unapproved, and they're very, very sensitive to possible charges of anti-Semitism, so they want to carefully police what they put out about Israel. And it means that all of the writers who are still there are under constant threat. They cannot, and now that I have been fired and made an example of, all of them know that if they tweet the wrong thing about Israel, they're out. They're gone. And immediately. There's no opportunity. You can apologize. You can delete it. It doesn't matter. You're gone. And Mulholland is watching your tweets, right? And I'm not sure who his UK equivalent is. He's the US editor, but he's watching. And so they know that. So I think it's really important to bear in mind that everything you see written publicly, every public statement by someone who is affiliated with this institution is being screened. And they all know inside their heads that if they say the wrong thing, they can be terminated. And so just bear that in mind, that there are things that they would say that they are not saying because they know what will happen.
Yeah, and that was the thought that I kind of had reading this article the first time, was how many people have kind of had careers buried that haven't had, that don't have editorial freedom at a, even if it's not a publication of the same size, to publish whatever they want after the fact.
I'll tell you, Forrest, people have contacted me since this and told me their stories, and they do not want me to tell their names. They don't even want me to publish their stories anonymously. Some of them are bound by non-disclosure agreements. Some of them just don't have non-disclosure agreements, but they just need jobs in the future, who are telling me very, very similar things happen to them. But it's a rare person who is in the position to just torch their relationship with one of the most prestigious and powerful newspapers in the world, because I'm not just torching my relationship with The Guardian. I'm making it basically so that I won't ever. I mean, maybe I don't know. There might be some rogue editor who likes it, but having shown that I'm willing to disclose an internal email like that means that no sensible editor is ever going to want to work with me, because they know that I am a loose cannon.
Or
so unless you can afford.
Or at the very least, they'll give you a very restrictive non-disclosure agreement or something like that. You know what I mean?
Well, yes, right? If I get another contract, right, it's probably going to have terms, and I'm going to have to decide whether I'm willing to abide by those terms. There are other things that I know that have happened, that I've seen in institutions, that I can't talk about because they'd have consequences for people. Right? And I don't want to hurt people. I want people to understand how the media really works, but because of how power works, I can't give an honest accounting of what is going on in these institutions, because everyone is under threat by the boss.
Yeah. So turns out that flexibility is not actually is not actually good for the vast majority of people, and among very many other things, and the many ways that it makes people's lives absolutely miserable on the bottom tier of the economy. It's also very bad for media just on its own terms, because if you want people, like, if you want to have the sort of media culture where people are having like an aggressive, debate, about, what's the Dave Rubin thing, high level ideas, then you don't, then you don't actually want people, to be constantly looking over their shoulder, because they know it's going to be really easy to fire them, and that even something like a tweet, that takes, like, most people think about tweets for like 3 seconds before they post them. And that they is obviously outside of a work context, they can be fired for, and I think that, like, especially if you want that kind of media culture, I mean, Nathan is exactly who you want to be uninhibited, because there's no like anything that the fact that he's going to write stuff like the 10,000 word, takedown of Mayor Pete, or various, conservative, media figures. I mean, if you want your sort of high level debate about ideas in the media, that's what it looks like. And so I think for that and many other reasons, this is a very ominous story about the Guardian. Please, subscribe to.
Oh, yeah. We have a brilliant ad right here.
Oh yeah, this is appearing in the latest issue of Jacobin. We found out that they do print ads, so we thought, oh, we should buy an ad for our rival magazine, and we shot this ad that has now appeared in Jacobin.
Yeah,
I'm in it, as you can see.
Yeah, that is an amazing ad. So please do subscribe to Current Affairs if you haven't already. They absolutely deserve your support. Thank you, Nathan, for coming on. Pleasure as always.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Forrest. Having independent media is just the only way you have real free speech. Right? Building independent power centers, and that's why the more people who support your show, the less under threat you are by any other jobs that you have, and the more people support affairs, the more we are able to tell them the truth, because it gives us freedom to do that.
You're muted. You're muted still.
Sorry. Thank you, Nathan. Always.
I'm not allowed to tweet about Texas, or David Griscom said I'm not allowed to, edit any Left Reckoning clips anymore.
Oh yeah. No, fair enough.
I've been censored. I complete solidarity on that one.
Fair enough. All right, let's stick on the intermission music for just a minute, and then we'll bring on David.
Okay.
All right, now joined by our friend and comrade David Griscom. Everybody better savor this. This is the last dose of Griscom we're going to have for a few weeks. Then he's going to be back. How you doing tonight, brother?
I'm doing pretty good, I have to say.
Yeah,
just been fielding calls from family, back home too, because this storm has really been crazy in Texas. But everyone in my family has been able to get into shelter and warmth. But man, it's crazy. People been out, haven't had power all day.
Yeah. My Texan in-laws are without power right now, and it's and my wife was saying that they said they're fine. It's just it's just kind of cold. I was like, oh yeah, come on, what are they calling cold? Because this is like the tip of South Texas. I just figured they like they were being ridiculous. Just like, I don't know, it's like 30 something. It's like, oh wow, that's like actually cold.
Yeah, man, it's like 10 degrees in a lot of the state. Yeah, it's been rough, but yeah, who knows, man? Crazy weather we're seeing these days. I don't know.
Yeah. Fair enough. So, and I should say, by the way, I hope in general that everybody who watches this is subscribed everywhere you can subscribe to Left Reckoning. But I was on the show last Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a lot of fun. So you can check that out on YouTube or everywhere that you get podcasts. We were talking about tech censorship, which ties into to what we were talking about this episode with Nathan and Shaun. But I. It is Outlaws and Revolutionaries. I've poured some whiskey. Let's talk about music.
Yeah, man. This week I wanted to talk about one of my personal favorite albums, and it's one of those albums that most people who listen to this kind of music might not be familiar with. It's an album by Rusty Kershaw, who is. Some people might know the name more from the work he did with his brother, Doug Kershaw. They're the people behind Louisiana Man, real serious Cajun-style Louisiana music. But he's done, he sort of is somebody who was in the limelight for a very brief moment, ended up recording some stuff and touring around with Neil Young. But Rusty Kershaw sort of fell out of music in large part for a long period of his life. But in this kind of moment where he was just sort of literally just working jobs like an electrician, sort of just in and out of the spotlight, just comes out of nowhere with this album called Cajun in the Blues Country. And it is by far one of my favorite albums I've ever listened to. Not only because the music's good as hell, but it's just such an interesting journey, and the musical range is absolutely incredible. I'll admit I discovered this album for the first time through one of my favorite country music podcasts, the Tyler Mahan Co. Called Cocaine and Rhinestones, which is a phenomenal podcast. And I'd never really heard. I'd heard of Kershaw before, and obviously I'd heard like those classic super intense Cajun songs, which I have a little bit of a soft spot for. But I wasn't familiar with Rusty's music or his album, and I've been dying and trying so hard to get a vinyl copy of it, and I have not been able to find one yet. But yeah, the Kershaws are cool, man. It's like they're just real Cajun boys, right? Real Louisiana guys. Didn't learn English until they were like 7 or 8. Real country Cajun folk. Sort of got their start in music when they were like really young too, like around 7 or 8. Going into town and playing fiddle and music for people, eventually having their parents sort of smuggle them into different honky tonks and bars, to pay for dimes on the dollar. And that's just one of those things that sort of sets you up for a very interesting life. If your formative memories are playing music for people in those kind of locations. But
yeah, right.
What's cool about them, and is that being Cajun for a really long time was one of those things that was looked down on, right? You're backwater, swamp people. You don't speak English, or you don't speak it well, right? And they were really famous for their song "Louisiana Man" and a few other pieces that they put out that really kind of flipped the script and did what a lot of great music does, which is taking pride in who they are and their history and their culture. And it's such a cool, it's such a cool thing to be able to see that throughout their life, and also like how they lived that kind of like Cajun mentality, not just in explicit ways, but also being people who very much were soaking up the culture around them. One of my favorite lines, and why I think that I really like this album, which I'll get to in a second, is how eclectic it is musically. So like Doug Kershaw said, when we started playing the bars, we also began to learn the songs off the jukeboxes. We didn't have a radio or a record player when I was growing up, so jukeboxes were really important to me. I learned to play it all. I still love to play Stardust. There were no labels on the jukebox. It wasn't country or jazz or Cajun. It was just music.
Yeah.
which is I think is exactly, which is exactly why these two guys are so great, in particular Rusty. So Rusty and Doug, they start this band. It's super famous. They're, big stars traveling around. And, it was one of those things that could have just gone on forever. Well, but Rusty just started to get this itch, and this is his explanation for it, why he just ended up leaving. And he didn't just like leave and go off and try to do his own solo career in music. Like, he left and just got a job as an electrician. Like, he went into like everyday life. But he said, I just couldn't stand the grind of touring and the same set every night. I like to play from the top of my head. Once you practice and get all those parts stuck together, that's what you've done. You're stuck. It takes the life out of it. To me, it's, oh man, we got to play this motherfucker again. So he splits from his brother, becomes an electrician. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to go very well for him. He develops pretty severe alcoholism, ends up in jail, and goes to rehab. And then he comes out of nowhere with this album, Cajun in the Blues Country, which it starts off, one of the second song on the album is the song called This Day and Time. And it's one of the most soulful blues songs. Frankly, one of my favorites of all time. I mean, just like real deal. Like, if you were seeing this at a bar, it'd be like everyone in the room gets quiet and they listen to this person just like sing their truth. But what's so great about this album is, like, you have that, you really get drawn in, and then next track comes on, and it's a real deal country fiddle. This great Cajun song called Fisherman's Luck. He's singing about how he's, fisherman, and he's, not having the best time. He's caught everything from a turtle to a cat. He's not catching any fish, right? So it's just like this pretty, traditional Cajun song. Next jam comes on, Keep on Trying. It's like the psychedelic, mind-bending guitar playing the super funky song. Sweet Peace of Mind. It's just an incredible merging of piano and steel guitar. It's a real jam, man. Charlie Daniels, by the way, is playing, guitar on it. Then he does it, and then another really great song called Country Boy. What happened to the country boy? Did he take his blues to town? And that's just another one that's like a real, like, serious, like, honky tonk, old school country. Like, he almost sounds like Doug Song. And that's why this album, and Rusty in particular, is just so cool. It's like, you're just like, these are 4 songs that are almost in completely different genres, right? But it's like, it's music, as he was saying earlier, right? It's just like, it's music, and he's being able to pull all these different styles together without really saying, okay, like, I have to fit into this one box. I'm just like expressing all of these things that affect my life and how I think and my art. And then, a couple other songs like Love City and The Country Boy, which follow that, are almost like identical musically. And they just play one into the other. And it's a pretty interesting jam, especially the way that it ends with Country Boy, because it's very much a song that's about fame, not being what you expect. He sings like, I got a new guitar, I got my name in lights. Why can't I hold you tight? Then he goes on, there's more great Charlie Daniels rocking on the guitar on it. Just a really phenomenal album that really just starts with the bang and just like keeps you hooked all the way through. So it's definitely like high up on my list of things for people to check out, even for people who might not like most of the other country music that I suggest. This one's real like swamp rock blues mixed in with some really fun Cajun stuff. But he's an interesting guy, and for people who like Neil Young. He was hanging out with Neil Young when Neil Young recorded On the Beach. There's a story that he got Neil Young into honey slides, which is powdered weed and honey. So he's just a very interesting guy. And I know that there's a really good story that he tells that Tyler Mahanco adds in his podcast where Rusty was playing with Neil Young in this band when they were doing all these recordings, and they're in this studio, and he's feeling that it's like extremely stale, right? Because it's just a room with the microphones and everyone's supposed to play, and he's not feeling the vibe. So he like starts throwing a fit and makes them all go out and get used furniture to put into the studio. He said, I said, this shit is too spiffy. We got to get this like your living room, man, sitting real close together, like we're at home. Either that, or let's put on some suits. So you can just sort of see, like, he was a very fascinating guy through his music and also his life, just sort of going into all of these different chapters, but had a real serious like artist mentality about this kind of stuff. Like, he gave up playing, being a kind of famous musician because he didn't want to play the same songs his whole life. He definitely had, the kind of demon that most great artists have, which is booze and drugs, but seemed to beat it, at least for a time being. And also just somebody who understood the creative process. It was just like, he was just not somebody who was going to be a studio musician and just like go in and like, okay, here's your notes, play it. He needed to have that kind of like creative juices and energy flowing, which I think is a really, really cool thing. And that album, I have to say, just one more time for people, Cajun in the Blues Country is by far one of my personal favorites of all time. It's just, it just draws you in. And every time you listen to it, it's one of these things that's so hard to talk about these albums. But if you hear him, just the way that he sings on that first, on that second song, sorry, This Day and Time, he sounds like just like the most incredible, soulful blues musician, which he is. And then the very next song, just super Cajun country accent all the way through. And it's really cool to see somebody be able to play all these different roles on just one album.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So any, I guess I should say, like I mentioned earlier, this is our last dose of Griscom for a few weeks. We'll have to we'll have to do something special for when you're settled into to where you're moving and you come back. Maybe we'll do something along the lines of the conversation we had with Matthew Sitman a while back. Yeah. But any want to give people some if they want to if they want to try to get that Outlaws and Revolutionaries fix in your absence for the next few weeks, want to recommend a few albums that people could try.
Yeah, I'll just tell people, if you haven't been listening to Coulter Wall, he's somebody who's very interesting, a good, very soulful, too, in the same kind of vein, Canadian cowboy singer, really, really inspired by like Delta blues. Highly suggest him. I've been really enjoying Hayes Carl, who's a Texas based.
I love Hayes Carl.
He's fun as hell.
One of the few country artists I actively listen to.
Yeah, he's awesome. He has some really, really funny songs.
He Left Me for Jesus is like,
which is a hilarious song for people who aren't familiar. Basically, they don't make it explicit, but it sounds like the kind of just like drunk rantings of some guy at a bar.
Yeah,
and he's basically like working up the confidence to go and kick this guy's ass.
Yeah,
because his girlfriend left him, but the person is Jesus. He's probably a commie, and like all this kind of stuff. It's a great.
He left Jesus, and that just ain't fair. He says that he's perfect. How could I compare? I should find him, and I'll know peace at last. If I ever find Jesus, I'm kicking his ass.
There you go. I love it, man. Yeah, it's a good jam. It's a really fun song.
Oh, nice. All right. Love you, brother.
Love you too, man.
All right. Thanks.
Talk to y'all later.
Talk to you later. All right. So I want to do a few things before we close out the episode for today, and we will take if there are more super chat questions, we will take a few of those at the end. And I know we also wanted to go back to the earlier questions about the PRO Act and fill in a few of those. Few of those details.
Did you see the tweet that I sent you though?
Yeah.
Fauci won a $1 million defending science prize from Israel. I don't know. I just felt like it was the perfect.
We were talking about Israel today, and the last week's Patron episode was about with Sam Adler-Bell, who co-hosts Know Your Enemy with Matthew Sitman. We were talking about Fauci, And of course, tonight we're talking about Israel. I should say that this week's Patreon episode, that I played a little bit of at the beginning, but it's a really good discussion with our friend Micah Utrecht from Jacobin about his Nation piece about the great Mike Davis. And it's a really good, like, if Davis is somebody who might like vaguely be on your radar, but you don't know that much about him, Micah's piece is like a really good overview of his body of work. Micah did an insane amount of reading to prepare for writing that article for the Nation. He basically spent the summer reading nothing but Mike Davis.
Yeah.
And
apparently, when we were doing the stream the other day, that he was like trying to get that he was trying to dip out of when we ended up going out like 2.5 hours. He had like a long novel to read for a piece he's writing, and I was talking to Kale about it, and Kale's like, "Oh, he has a long novel he's supposed to be reading."
You know what the novel is?
No, he didn't tell me.
Yeah, but it's a really good like synthesis. Gives you a really good overview of Davis's work, which goes like over the course of a few decades of getting a lot of really depressing stuff right in terms of predicting the collapse of the housing bubble, the continued decline of the labor movement, predicted in a 2005 book that he wrote about avian flu, predicted that the next time there was a big pandemic that the public health system would be totally unprepared for it, is called the Monster at the Door. And there was a 2020 reissue called The Monster Enters. And then going into the way that Davis is that all of the sort of themes that Davis has been working on through in these big thick books that he's been writing about ecological and economic and public health crises, that he hasn't traded in any of that for blind optimism, but in the last couple of books he started to see a little bit of sign of hope from Bernie, from the emergence of DSA, from all of that, and so it's a really good, interesting, meaty discussion for those things. I know Jason Miles.
He recently interviewed him.
Yeah, but it's also just fun. And actually, it's probably a good companion to that Jason Miles interview of Davis himself, because of some of the stories about Davis that are in Micah's article that we talk about in the interview. Like, there's this really important and prominent act, like when Davis was even though he's been this incredibly important historian and scholar, he never finished graduate school. He spent a lot of time driving a truck. And he also worked for a long time at New Left Review, where like one of the stories about the New Left Review times, there was this really famous and prominent academic historian who wrote in to complain to them about the reception his work was getting at New Left Review. And it was, and the response that Davis wrote was literally, "Dear Professor Genovese, go fuck yourself, Mike Davis." And like there was something where he got really mad at some editorial decision, and he actually dumped out this poisonous snake and this carnivorous toad and stuff onto the floor of the New Left Review office. So,
what was the catalyst for Micah writing the article? Just that it's the pandemic and that his work kind of seems.
So I think that was probably part of it. I think he also just went on this deep dive, reading all of these Mike Davis books, and he wanted to kind of do this overall appreciation of his of his body of work. And anyway, so it's a really interesting article, and look, I just had something in the Nation, and and that was like a very short piece, but like this thing that Micah wrote, it's the printout of his article is 22 pages long. It's this like in-depth thing about this thinker's whole body of work, but it's also one of the most popular articles that's in the Nation in the last few weeks.
Yeah, it's on their front whatever.
Yeah. So anyway, you can get if you join the Patreons. That's patreon.com/Ben Burgess. So you can get that. We'll obviously run a preview on Thursday, like we always do, but you can get that full interview with Micah about the Mike Davis piece. You can also get a Thursday episode every week, and then there's also the Discord that you get, and we do regularly, at least once a month, this Discord office hours group voice chats. And also, I should say this week, this coming Saturday, we are trying out something new. We talked a little bit last week with Jason Miles about about Fred Hampton and that history with the Black Panthers and the Young Patriots.
By the way, the PBS documentary on the Rainbow Coalition that they've been kind of talking about for a while, I guess that's finally available to stream publicly on the PBS website. I've been trying to watch that for like months.
Yeah. But there's the Fred Hampton movie that just came out, Judas and the Black Messiah. So we are going to be trying something new on Saturday. We're going to do a live showing of that on the GTAA Discord for patrons with commentary by me and Forrest, also Jason Miles, and also our friend Jeremy Salmon from the Giving the Mic to the Wrong Person podcast, and I think possibly a fifth person, although I don't remember who we were talking about.
No, she said she couldn't make it on.
Okay, all right. But, so anyway, yeah. Me and Forrest and Jason and Jeremy. So that should be a lot of fun. We're doing that on Saturday. On Wednesday, we've been doing the regular Wednesday movie podcast, movie live streams on the YouTube channel, and of course also the regular Sunday ones took off this last Sunday because of Valentine's Day, but that's back on this Sunday. We're having Ryan Lake and Mark Warren on. We're going to be talking about we're going to be watching and commenting on William Lane Craig's debate with Shelley Kagan for a couple reasons. One, we watched the William Lane Craig debate with Hitchens a couple weeks ago, and so we thought it'd be good to watch since Hitchens, whatever complicated feelings we might all have about him, did not do well in that debate. But so this is one where I think the tables are turned on Craig, and also it's part of my preparation for something I'm doing the day after that. So that debate, Sunday debate breakdown series, that's this Sunday, the 21st, and on February 22nd on the Modern Day Debate YouTube channel, I'm going to be debating Doug Wilson, kind of about the same topic as the William Lane Craig Shelley Kagan thing. And Wilson, somebody who also debated Hitchens a bunch of times. He's a extremely conservative mega church pastor.
I don't know why you're platforming him.
Yeah. So I got an email this morning, and this is always funny to me when I do this, when I get these, because it's not that I mind. Like I'm always happy to get communication about whatever, but it's always kind of funny when instead of whatever. I mean, I've got the website with the contact thing, whatever, but like when people track down my day job email to let me know something like this, that somebody tracked down my day job work email to let me know that it was bad that I was platforming Doug Wilson by agreeing to debate him, which is hilarious because that church where Wilson is a pastor, like they have their own magazine, they have their own little theological seminary to train pastors, they have like everything you can imagine. They have he debated Christopher Hitchens a bunch of times. He did a book of battling essays with Christopher Hitchens. He wrote so many other books that his Wikipedia page is like longer than most articles that I've written.
Wait, he wrote a book with Hitchens or about Hitchens?
With Hitchens. It's like battling back and forth.
Oh, so it's like, yeah, it's dueling essays. All right.
Yeah. So all I'm saying here is I don't think him debating me is going to be his big break. But I also generally think that platforming taboos are ridiculous, and they generally have the effect of like cutting us off from audiences of persuadable people, and also handing the right a talking point. Look how afraid they are to engage also, with.
Isn't Jesus platforming us all, brother?
Speaking of, got a super chat here from RXT. Says that 1,000 patrons would you debate a libertarian hammered and/or on acid. It would be a great promo. Adam Kokesh would be the ideal libertarian for this. Yeah, I'll hey, if Adam wants to, maybe after the pandemic we can we can drop some acid or take some mescaline or something, and we can do it on his homestead. We can do a debate about libertarianism and socialism. I think
his arguments might actually start to make sense if you take enough acid. I don't know. Like, this is my house. This is my land. It's sovereign. And you're like, you know what? All right. Like, aren't we all just kind of sitting on sovereign land? Like,
so, hey, I'm down for the psychedelic gardenia debate. Any of the any of the times I did may or may not have done things like that earlier in my life. I didn't do anything nearly as interesting as that. But yeah, so that's all coming up. The debate breakdown live stream with Ryan and Mark is on Sunday. And my debate with Doug Wilson is on Monday. And it's more of an abstract philosophical debate, but I think it also does get to the heart of the stuff he uses as the basis for his political arguments. Actually, that one would be a fun one to do on some sort of psychedelic, but we're not going to do that on Monday. But
on Monday, so you're doing that on a different platform. Are we still having a?
Yeah. I'm doing that on a different platform at 5. And
we have I know. All right.
5 Eastern, and then we should be ready to. I should be done with that and able to come back and do the episode at 7:30. Our guest is going to be the great Emma Vigeland. Really looking forward to that. Haven't had her on in a long time. On Wednesday, we are going to. So this Wednesday, day after tomorrow, we are going to be doing a Wednesday movie live stream about RoboCop.
That should be really fun.
Yes, that's with Jason Miles, Forrest, and Micah Utrecht.
The full prompt is RoboCop as what a neoliberal how-to manual. I think the full title that Jason pitched us.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny. I've been doing. We'll see. I've obviously seen RoboCop, but not lately. So tomorrow night I'll rewatch it, and we'll see if I can get Jennifer to watch it with me. It's possible, since we've been going through this this thing that's this book of prompts, for watching 52 movies in a year. And so she said she'd consider it if we could find one that would fit into, and I could, because there was because we're in Michigan, and one of the categories is movies set in your region. So of course, RoboCop is set in Detroit, a near future Detroit, with a private corporation taking over policing. Given general horrifying neoliberal dystopia, so obviously very unrealistic stuff, hard to take seriously.
And it's at in the middle of the Bush era, like at the tail end of the Reagan era, kind of set around that. Something that I found out.
1987, I think. So the tail end of the Reagan era.
Yeah. So something interesting that I guess I read on Wikipedia when I was talking to Jason about it on Twitter. I guess the director, and I forget the director's name, but he
Verhoeven.
He didn't he almost didn't do it because he turned it down multiple times because he didn't really understand the satire. and I guess his wife had to explain like the satire to him, and then he was like, "Oh wow, that's funny. All right." Like
That's hilarious. Oh, so lots of good stuff coming up. Please do. We're talking about the Patreon. We should do Andy's promotional comic. So we didn't do the most recent one last week. J. Andrew World, the very talented graphic designer who does all the thumbnails for the show, has also been doing this series of Pulp Fiction themed comics to promote the Give Them an Argument Patreon. So since this is a little bit of a you kind of have to know Pulp Fiction pretty well, and also to have watched or listened to the show enough times to have heard me make the joke about the $5 milkshakes at Jackrabbit Slim's from Pulp Fiction, which is the same as the monthly cost of the Patreon. So the comic, you see the Gimp from Pulp Fiction enjoyed a milkshake with Archie from Archie Comics, and then dancing, and then because they do the like dance competition at Jackrabbit Slim's and Pulp Fiction, and then Archie says, "See, you should save your money for Jackrabbit Slim's." The Gimp, who of course doesn't, just sort of mumbles through his Gimp mask, says, and Archie says, "You just had to ruin a great night by bringing up Give Them an Argument with Ben Burgess, didn't you?" So, but please do that,
and we have the Libertarian Superman one. I don't think he's finished with it though. He sent it to me last week. I don't know. I guess we should wait till Jason's on to.
Yeah. We should wait till Jason's on to do the Libertarian Superman, because he requested that. That's hold on. Is that Zed? Is that the? I've seen Pulp Fiction so many times. I should know this.
Zed. Yeah, Zed is the guy that owns the pawn shop, I think.
Okay, yeah.
He's the guy with the motorcycle, and then he rides off on it. He says, "Zed's dead, baby."
Yeah, there we go. So yeah, please do do that. So again, patreon.com/Ben Burgess. So $5 a month, get the patron bonus episodes, get the Discord server, get the monthly Sopranos bonus episodes with Nando Vila, Wozny Lombre, and Mike Racine. The last one we went up for patrons last week, probably unlock it for everybody else at the end of the month. And you get the Discord office hours, group voice chats, and if the live movie showing on the Discord works out well next on Saturday, then we might start doing that more. Maybe make it a monthly feature. We'll see. But
it'd be cool to do another Fred Hampton one, like one of the documentaries. It'd be cool to kind of go down that rabbit hole for
yeah, for sure. Tom from Yakubia, thank you for the super chats. Thanks for the marathon shows. Really appreciate everybody for stuck with us to the bitter end here.
Want to do the pro act stuff really fast?
Sorry, I totally forgot. Yeah. So
I also have one other thing I wanted to touch on quickly.
Yeah, sure. Nope. We could totally do another 10 minutes here. So So we were talking about the Pro Act earlier with Shaun Richman, and I know there were a couple. Yeah, I remember there were a couple super chat questions which were answered, but then Forrest wanted to throw in a little bit more to those answers.
Because it kind of went really fast and without really explaining. Hold on, I gotta get the link up. It went really fast without kind of explaining the how the Pro Act would have worked, which I was curious about.
No, Shaun's really good for this stuff because he knows it inside and out, and he has a lot of really interesting things to say about it. But I think he's also so steeped in this stuff, that I think sometimes he'll just kind of throw this out and forget that most people who consume left media don't necessarily know the ins and outs of this labor law stuff.
Yeah. So this is a super. So I was reading a little bit of it when you guys were talking, because just in case like there was stuff we wanted to pull up, and this is a fact sheet. So this isn't the actual text of it. The actual thing is like it's like at least a dozen pages of like really cryptic language. I mean, it's written as a regular bill, but it's like it changes the wording in like the NLRB Act. It like so a lot of it is just changing small words to make certain things codified into law. And with that, when so the part that makes it so that you have the strike law is literally just a word change. Safe charge. Oh, bill protects. Enhances workers' right to support boycotts, strikes, or other acts of solidarity. The bill protects workers' First Amendment rights by removing prohibition on workers acting in solidarity with workers at other companies, safeguards the right to strike by clarifying that intermittent strikes don't lose their federal protection, and by prohibiting companies from permanently replacing workers who participated in the strike. So it's super, wonky, democratic, technocrat language to safeguard some of these things.
Yeah, although these are, I mean, these are important things, that it's doing, that it does like take away some of the really evil stuff that Taft-Hartley does to limit workers' rights to organize, even if there are important things that Shaun was talking about earlier that
no, it's positive. It's definitely a positive. It's a positive law, like by far. I mean, considering that we're getting closer and closer, I feel like, to like federal right to work laws. You know what I mean? Like it comes like that, all of that, like the Supreme Court pretty frequently sides with like corporate interests. Like they very rarely side with workers in any way, shape, or form. So something like this would be game changing, I think, for American workers within the system that we have now. I mean, without disrupting it. You know what I mean? But yeah, it does a lot of protections for unions. It codifies the right to organize. And the thing that the thing that I was going to discuss was that the meaningful penalties for companies and executives for violating workers' rights, it's up to $50,000, which, if you look at it as a huge corporation, let's say, isn't very much, but it is enough that like the pushback is real from the bosses that don't want something like this to happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this would be, this would be really good. I mean, I think as far as like, legislative reform to make the landscape, a little bit better for organizing unions, I think this is certainly, I mean, it'd be great if this happened. We'll see.
This is the actual text of it. The Billboard, that's what I just showed you. Hold on. I had the actual text of it somewhere here.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like I said, we'll see whether it actually happens. Despite the argument, so I actually just wrote something about the filibuster for Jacobin, and so just as a real like momentary refresher on that issue. The way, and this by the way is the Jacobin article. It's long past time to abolish the filibuster, and the issue that Shaun was, I was kind of going back and forth with Shaun, is whether you actually even could necessarily do this without getting rid of the filibuster, because there's budget reconciliation, which basically says that you can pass something with just 50 votes if it has significant budgetary impact. What counts as having significant budgetary impact is a little bit slippery sometimes. But it's the precedent is not great, because like the Employee Free Choice Act was the big bit of labor law reform that Obama promised that he was going to get through when he ran in 2008. Joe Biden, by the way, was the person who was in charge of of the effort to get it through, and he basically just gave up right away. Which is not an inspiring precedent. That's
classic Biden.
Yeah. So
God, reading yesterday's Man got me so fucking depressed a couple weeks ago. I had to stop for like a week and take a break. Like just seeing his role in pretty much every major problem that we have. You know what I mean? Like at least ones that popped up in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
So an employer who commits an unfair labor practice within the meaning of Section 8A shall, in addition to remedy by the board, be subject to a civil penalty in amount not to exceed $50,000 for each violation. Which obviously, if you're somewhere like Amazon or something that has tons of employees and they collectively decide that you've committed unfair labor practices, that could be hundreds and hundreds of settlements.
Which is what Shaun was talking about. That's the argument for getting it through reconciliation. That you say, if like you actually started like enforcing it, getting these unfair labor practices, these ULF judgments, anything like as often as companies actually violate these laws, then that would generate a massive amount of money for the federal government, and so that would have a huge budgetary impact. So that would be the argument for saying that you could actually pass it through the reconciliation process.
That's smart. I mean, that's in a super wonky way. That's very smart.
Yeah. I should say one of the things got into the Jackman article is that it's not like this whole reconciliation workaround for the filibuster is not great because you can. So, like one small example, I think I got this from Dave Dan, of the limits of it is like, there's been some discussion lately about whether you can do a $15 minimum wage through reconciliation, and the argument for saying that you can is that it would have big budgetary impacts because people would be making more money, generating more tax revenue, and B, because a lot of people would then lose their eligibility for means-tested support, like food assistance. They would have big budgetary impact that way, which is a kind of indication of the limits of that strategy, because obviously it's not great that people would be losing these things. And of course, you could package together the $15 minimum wage with raising the floor, raising the ceiling for there's the means tested food assistance, but we are in a pandemic. But then if you did that, you'd risk balancing out the budget impacts and no longer being able to pass it through reconciliation.
It's I don't know. I just feel like when it comes to these strategies, like Democrats, especially like Biden, always sides with the like, oh, let's just go in the middle and try to get it past the straightforward way, and then they end up conceding everything in the process.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, really, earlier we were talking about George H.W. Bush as the Zelig of evil. People don't know what we're talking about, by the way. It's an old Woody Allen movie about this guy who's everywhere, and all these different historical events. But this is Joe Biden's definitely the Zelig of great moments and shitty, central.
I call him the Forrest Gump of reactionary politics.
Yeah. So in that Jacobin filibuster piece, like one of the things I ran into is the classic Bernie filibuster that helped set up his run for president. When Bernie gave that 8-hour speech denouncing the deal to extend the Bush tax cuts. You'll never guess who brokered that deal.
Old Uncle Joe.
Exactly. So.
Well, the other crazy thing is his credit card. So he was going to bat. This is something that I posted on Twitter, like when I was reading through yesterday's Man. So the original scandal that he had with that credit card company, he had Hunter working at the credit card company in Delaware. That was his first like pay to play version of that. So he had him working in 1999 at a credit card company in Delaware, and then they were like heavily lobbying him And it was the thing that got Elizabeth Warren to like leave the Republican Party and go to Congress to testify as a law professor. It was just such a crooked like dealing by Biden.
Yeah. Which reminds me, by the way, something I forgot to bring up earlier when we were talking to Nathan Robinson is that there is a really interesting detail that's just kind of mentioned in passing in his article about being fired from the Guardian, but is worth. Here we go. Let me just do the quick screen share because I think it's worth not letting go. This is. He says just in passing, he's talking about his previous employment at the Guardian, and he says, "I only had a column spiked for content reasons once, as far as I can remember, which occurred when I criticized Joe Biden over Hunter Biden's corrupt business ties."
The same as the Glenn Greenwald leaving the Intercept thing.
Exactly.
Didn't Glenn Greenwald also originally leave the Guardian? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, Glenn Greenwald was at the Guardian before his
yeah.
Intercept. It was Salon, then the Guardian, then the Intercept. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that the whole Glenn Greenwald experience at the Intercept, that detail about Nathan at the Guardian, even these like somewhat progressive but a little bit more mainstream publications are very defensive about the Biden family and about that Hunter story.
Yeah,
which obviously, like, as are the social media oligarchs. Remember that that for a while Twitter wasn't even letting you share that New York Post story about Hunter Biden in a DM. And so it's it's something that's whatever. I mean, I don't want to make too big a deal about it, but I mean it's something that's worth that's worth highlighting. Like whatever combination of factors might lead to that attitude. And I'm sure. Look, I know, given when the Glenn Greenwald thing happened, a lot of it was just that the Intercept didn't want people yelling at them for having lost votes to Biden. For having caused people not to vote for Biden.
Yeah.
And obviously with the New York Post thing, that was a lot of what was going on there with the social media reaction. Frankly, I think there is also question about how much of the media defensiveness about this has to do with just the idea of this kind of like corrupt, like low-level corruption and nepotism not being something that people want to to make a big deal of, because if you want access to power, that's something that annoys a lot of people.
Yeah, and I mean, also there's, I think when it comes to specifically the 2020 election, I think a lot of journalists felt like Trump had declared a war on them specifically. So I think there's also the element of like them just wanting to get rid of him. Because it got so tense between journalists and the Trump administration, which is not good. They should be neutral either way. Not neutral, but you know what I mean? Like reporting the news either way. Like, you know what I mean? I don't think that they should be filtering stories based on that. But it does feel to me like on some level it got so tense between how journalists saw themselves and how Trump saw them that that they just, a lot of like they just wanted him out.
Yeah, right. And fair enough, but it's also
media failing.
yeah. I mean, it's also a huge failure of media that, I mean, surely, if you were going to make, I mean, obviously, Donald Trump, being openly hostile to, to the media like that, calling them the enemies of the people, etc., is very bad. But also, look, what are you trying to preserve, right? In opposing Trump and Trumpism, if what you're trying to preserve is like a robust oppositional media, then this is kind of then the whole closing ranks around the Hunter Biden thing, has a little bit of a whiff of, burning the village to save it.
Yeah, but also, I mean, a lot of journalists did get legitimate like death threats and stuff from MAGA people, and
right.
On a personal level, on a higher, like on a bigger level, I agree. Like you're kind of just
No, I sure. I mean, you can't blame anybody for hating Trump and his movement. I mean, whatever, that's appropriate. But I think but there is a bigger question about what we want the role of the media to be, and I think the Hunter Biden thing was a very bad side. It was also a very bad side when they did that like first press conference under Biden, and there were all these questions that were like fawning, are you planning to restore integrity and tell us the truth? It's like, Jesus Christ, man, have a little bit of a sense of self-respect. These guys are not your friend. You're supposed to be reporting on them in an oppositional way.
I think though, also, I'm sure for some media outlets, they let Hunter Biden through the first time, like the Obama administration. You know what I mean? Like, pointing it out now, it's like, all right, well, why didn't you report this story, back in 2008 or 2009? And, because all these, they had such a cozy relationship with the Obama administration at times. I mean, I don't think Obama felt like he had a cozy relationship with them, but they felt like they had a cozy relationship with the Obama administration. So they kind of let that slide the first time. It's kind of almost admitting complete failure if this time they're like, what about this?
For the most part, there was a cozy relationship with the Obama administration, although it's also complicated because the Obama administration actually went really hard against journalists to.
I don't think Obama saw it that way. I think journalists saw it that way. I don't think Obama saw it that way.
Yeah, I think a lot of elite journalists did see it that way, even though, again, the Obama administration was being absolutely ruthless and cracking down on journalists for protecting whistleblower sources, not to mention, of course, the whole, prosecution, persecution of Assange and Snowden, which the whole thing was in any remotely objective terms, a huge threat to, global freedom of the press. But basically, if the question is, are mainstream reporters doing stenography at the White House treated like buddies superficially by the Obama administration, and do they feel like they have access to power? Then yeah, sure.
Well, it's the Kennedy thing, like Kennedy kind of didn't have a good opinion of the press, but he knew how to manipulate them to get them to only report what he wanted to. Like, there's that famous story that he got caught. I think he got caught having an affair or something by a reporter, and almost seduced her into not reporting it by being like, you really want to do this to me? Like, you know what I mean? Like letting reporters into his inner circle, to, you know what I mean? Like, superficially, to make them feel like they were part of it, and now they have a stake in it. And, they really haven't learned, journalists haven't learned in 50 years that that's the case. Like, I mean, not, just the mainstream ones that want to have that relationship with power anyway.
Yeah. Hi, Jeffrey. That's our friend of the show, hosts a left-wing radio show in New Orleans called Good Morning Comrade. People should check that out. But hey, I think we do want to cut it here for today.
All right, the thing that I was gonna cover, I'll cover with. I think it'll be fun to cover.
Yeah, I think it'll be good to do that with that.
I wanted to cover the Lloyd Austin thing, where he said that he was going to leave Raytheon, and then they sold, the first arms sale of the Biden administration was Raytheon. I thought that would be fun to cover, but that's definitely an Emma thing.
Yeah, let's do it next week with Emma Vigland. So again, Wednesday. Me, Forrest, Ryan Lake, and Jason Miles and Micah Utrecht will be talking about RoboCop. Actually, there is going to be, I'll just ambiguously tease it now because I'm not sure if it's going to start this week or next week, maybe next week, but there is going to be a new series of a Friday live stream starting very soon. That's going to be Philosophy Fridays with somebody who viewers have not seen before, but they will get used to seeing on the channel. Please do subscribe like and subscribe here on YouTube. Please do rate and review wherever you get podcasts. Again, thanks to everybody who hung with us this far. See you on Wednesday for the RoboCop stream. See you maybe on Friday if we do that. See you on Sunday for the Sunday night debate
On
breakdown.
Saturday for the Fred Hampton stream.
Saturday for the Fred Hampton stream. So
got a busy week.
Yeah, nobody's going to have a shortage of GTA in their lives this week, and of course for the main event back here next Monday, 7:30 Eastern, with the great Emma Vigland. So really appreciate all of you. Left.